Well, we're at 6 o'clock now, so I'll call for a roll call.
Okay, Chair. Start with Committee Member Peetzold.
Here.
Committee Member Smallwood.
Here.
Committee Member Sheldon.
Here.
Committee Member Walker.
Here.
Committee Member Exner.
I'm over here.
Committee Member Hokinson.
Right here.
Committee Member Pulliam.
Here.
Committee Member Phipps. I don't see yet. Committee Member Van Gent.
Here.
Committee Member Lee.
Here.
Committee Member Myram.
Here.
Committee Member Huber.
Here.
And Chair Malone.
Here. Okay, going down the agenda, we have the minutes from the meeting on, actually the training meeting. Is there any motion on the meeting minutes on the agenda?
I move that we approve the minutes.
I never get to do this, so I would like to second it, please.
Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Stan, that we approve the minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye or a thumbs up. Looks like it passed. Did you get those, Jeff? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
And now we'll go on to the presentation of the budget, and I'll turn it over to Tyler or to Jordan, whoever wants to take the lead on that.
Thank you, Chair Malone. I'm Jordan Wheeler. I'm the city manager. It's good to see, at least on my screen, I think most of the faces here, we have a lot of panelists that will be joining us because the department heads will be giving the presentations on the department budgets and funds. And so that's why we have so many panelists tonight. And I think before the meeting, I think I heard Chair Malone talking about how the difficulties of Zoom, and I think especially as you get these bigger meetings with 13 committee members and staff, you really start hitting those limitations. So we'll do our best. We'll have slideshows, at least slides to help presenting the budgets, and we hope you can follow along either electronically, if you split your screens or have multiple screens, or if you have a paper copy of the budget. There you go. You can follow along. We'll have page numbers on each of the slides too at the department presentation, so you can follow along. I am going to do a screen share here and pull up the presentation. Can everyone see that? Is that working? There we go. Okay, should be full screen. Does everybody see the full screen now? Okay, thank you. I see nodded heads. All right, so thanks again for being here tonight. You know, being a part of a budget committee is an important role, especially in the state of Oregon, where the budget committee has a little more authority and powers to review the proposed budget and submit a recommendation to the city council. So one of those important roles is to be that public involvement conduit where you have an equal amount of appointed citizens from the city of Sandy that assist the city council in the review of the budget. And then ultimately provide a recommendation of an approved budget that goes to the city council for their consideration. Now, another issue with Zoom meetings is you may hear my kids in the background because it's dinner time and they get a little wild. But I think the council's pretty used to that now. But for the 6 of you appointed members, that's just the fact of life here in the last year. And that, as you probably read in the budget message, that's one of the themes and contexts is that we're working under. And one of the issues of developing this budget was the fact that we're working remotely for part of the time or half time. We don't have as much face-to-face interaction as staff and with the community. And all that just makes, you know, life a little bit harder for us to, you know, work through developing a budget and working with the council through, you know, 3 or 4 different goal setting meetings that were all done virtually. I think we did one tour where we got to get together in person, which was nice. But this has certainly been a very interesting and challenging year. And I just applaud staff, the city council for working through this, the community with all the hardships that people have been going through. And so tonight I hope to just run through the budget summaries really quick. I don't want to bore you with too many numbers up front, touch on some of the highlights and trends of the budget, and then we can get into the presentations from the department heads. So I always start with the big numbers and break up into resources and revenues, and then requirements and expenditures. But I start with this big number because it doesn't mean a whole lot out of context. And as we dive into each of the next layers of the budget, it will give a little more better information than just a big number like $102 million, which is the City of Sandy's proposed budget for this biennium. That number is inflated. I always have that disclaimer when we present our budgets. It includes things like the general revenue, because of the way we do budgeting. We collect our general revenue and then we allocate it out to the direct service departments in the general fund. So that inflates the budget. So does the indirect service charges and the transfers. Transfers always inflate your budget. So that number is a little bit misleading. But the budget has increased on both the operating side and the capital. Of course, the sewer project is a major driver for the capital increase. Debt service has increased. And then our operating budget has increased with the increases in personnel services. And then, of course, like transfers with the corresponding direct service charges. Resources, a quick snapshot here. And resources include not just revenues, but also ongoing revenues. So of course, property taxes, fines like library fines, and fees like SDCs, and utility rates are included in revenues. And then loan proceeds has appeared on this pie chart as a major source this biennium, with both the clean water revolving fund loan proceeds for the wastewater project and a proposed revenue bond for that project as well. So let's dive into revenues, which I think is a better snapshot of what we're collecting as the ongoing sources of revenue to run the city. The biggest is those fines, fees, and assessments. That includes the public safety fee, those SDC charges I mentioned, and utility fees for all the utilities, water, wastewater, Sandy Net, and stormwater. The library district funds are included in intergovernmental revenues. That's the bulk of that, plus state revenue sharing, which is a general revenue source. And then grants, the ARPA, you may see that acronym a few more times tonight. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act, $2.3 million coming to the City of Sandy. And I'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. And then loan proceeds of $20 million is basically almost entirely wastewater for funding the next parts of that major project. Talk about general revenues. It was one of the reasons why we had that early budget committee meeting, is so that we can get out of the way sort of the talk about how we budget in the City of Sandy, and that budgeting approach of being fully transparent on the revenues that are collected into the general fund and how those are allocated to the direct service departments, and then how they pay the administrative costs to the indirect service departments in the general fund. So general revenues are those major revenues that come into the general fund that are unrestricted and can be used for any purposes. We include the beginning balance in that total. But this number also is inflated by $2.3 million because of that major ARPA funding of $2.3 million. And that's in our general fund contingency right now, or is proposed to be put in the contingency. But the major source here, of course, is property taxes, $8.1 million over the biennium, which is still showing healthy growth. And I'll have a slide later that shows that. In terms of allocation, over half of the general revenue goes to the police department. It's our largest department in the city. It's the majority of it is done by paid city employees, police officers. So it has a corresponding high need to have general revenue support those functions. It's supplemented by the public safety fee, which pays for 2 police officers. And then, pretty much everything else is fairly evenly spread, especially as you talk about recreation or seniors and parks as the other major source of needing funding for general revenue that doesn't have other sources that can supply the bulk of their revenue, like planning or building. Property tax, I mentioned, is one of the nice things I like to see as a city manager that helps us keep pace with the rise in just our operating costs and inflation and personnel costs going up is the fact that our property tax revenue is growing and growing healthy. This has been the case since coming out of the Great Recession, when it really started to accelerate with new construction, home improvements, expanding the UGB and bringing more lands in, commercial development even. So the average growth is about 5.5% over the last several years, and that's both on property tax revenue and the assessed values in the city of Sandy. So to put this in perspective, most cities, especially if you're built out, you anticipate at least getting the 3% automatic assessed value increase, but we're getting at least 2 to 3% on top of that in new construction, new improvements that add to assessed value. So this trend we think will continue. The pipeline of new developments hasn't really slowed down even despite COVID, which will continue to supply some healthy growth in our property taxes. I'd like to share this just as a reminder that property taxes go to a lot of different agencies and local districts. The city of Sandy collects about 32% of taxes that a homeowner may pay on their annual tax bill. Education has its own Measure 5 category, but also the Oregon Trail School District has that bond that they also pay. So fortunately, the other night with Elaine Howard, we talked about how urban renewal is funded and why it shows up on the tax bill. So I don't have to try to explain that, and I won't. But those are the two things that you'll see on a tax bill that our city services that you pay your property taxes for. All right, let's talk about expenditures now. On requirements. Requirements essentially includes the operating budget plus capital and contingencies and any fund balances. The bulk of our operating costs are personnel and materials, but this year we have a lot of capital outlay that's happening with the wastewater and the street projects. And then requirements also include contingencies within each of the funds. By fund, our general fund is still the largest fund. Some of that is, of course, because of that inflation, those factors that inflate our budget with the general revenue transfers. But coming up right behind, if not surpassing the general fund now, is the sewer budget, with 20 million in bonds and loans coming in, and nearly that amount going out in terms of capital expenditures over the biennium. So the doubling of the rates a couple years ago and continued rate increases is now translating into a lot of capital expenditures as we invest in our collection system and treatment plant and the future phases to address those issues with our wastewater system. Streets has also increased with a large amount of expenditures and capital happening this biennium, starting this summer with the 362nd and Bell Street extension. A better snapshot is the operating budget because it takes out those fund balances and contingencies and the capital, which are volatile year to year. Personnel, materials, and debt service are included. That we also include transfers, which again, depending on what type of transfer, it can inflate that budget. But you'll notice that if you look at the trends, our operating budget has jumped significantly from the prior bienniums, but you can easily kind of start picking out where that's coming from. The sewer bond reserve are two major factors as we pay off the old USDA loan in the sewer from our previous sewage treatment plant improvement from about 30 years ago. And then new debt service coming into the sewer fund is going to increase our operating costs. In the general fund, a large amount of increase in personnel services is a driver of that, as well as transfers. Police especially has, I think, about $500,000 of that with the public safety fee fully implemented with the new officers in that department. Speaking of staffing and police, nearly 20 FTE is our largest department, but just a quick look at the FTEs for the city. I mentioned that, maybe I didn't mention this, but one of the themes of this budget is that we're again trying to hold the line and maintain status quo in terms of our operating budget. There's not really any new programs or services that are being proposed. A lot of capital, a lot of infrastructure investment, continued work on plans and planning for growth with master plans are funded in this budget. But overall, not a lot of proposals for new staff or new programs. I think there's just a couple staff that are reflected in this budget that are either been added or planned to be added. One FTE in Sandy Net in the second year of the biennium. We were trying to fill another position in Public Works as a city engineer position. The recruitment for that did not turn out any candidates, so we have to go back to the drawing board. But overall, not a lot of changes in FTEs or overall staffing, and our FTE per capita has remained pretty steady over the last decade. I'm always happy if a city councilor would like to talk more about city council goals, but I can briefly just kind of talk about these because they do feed into the overall highlights of the budget. The council, like I mentioned, had 3 goal setting meetings where they drafted a draft vision and then several goals and action items for this biennium. So I thought it was a great goal setting session. And we had a facilitator to help kind of work through all the different themes and things that the council wants to accomplish, and came up with some great goals. And yeah, our website has all these goals, and I think the budget too, we included the goals with the action items that have more detail about these individual goals. The major, that first goal of planning and for a sustainable infrastructure, we do have a lot of capital projects that are in this budget that are being funded. Wastewater is going to continue to be a theme as it was in the last biennium. It's going to be a theme for the next 5 years and beyond as we work on this major project that is tens of millions of dollars. The 362nd and Bell Street, another high priority infrastructure project that is funded and that will hopefully be breaking ground really soon this summer. And like last year, with the Parks Master Plan to be adopted by the council this summer, we've included the budget an amount in Parks Capital, in the Parks Capital Fund, to build a new park. It's a biennium budget, so there's a 2-year process there, and we may not spend all of that. But the Parks Master Plan should provide a good recommendation to the City Council on the next park to build in Sandy. So we wanted to make sure the budget had that flexibility to have that funding available to execute on that. And I talked about the continuing planning efforts, the council goal to do the comprehensive plan update. We sent the planning department additional general revenue this biennium, about $250,000 to do that work. Planning staff are working with council and working on sort of the plan and project plan for what kind of resources we may need for that. This is sort of a placeholder until we kind of get a full scope on what may be involved with public outreach and consultant help and planning consultant help. But we felt like getting at least a couple $100,000 in there is about what we've seen other communities need, especially over biennium, to do a comp plan update, which is a 2 to 3 year effort. The public safety fee was adopted with the previous budget cycle and enacted by the council by ordinance. Part of that ordinance is to review that with the budget committee every biennium. So we've budgeted $557,000 for the public safety fee to continue achieving the objectives of having new officers, increase public safety in our city. The fee is not proposed to be changed. I think it's $4.50 for residential properties, and I think $10.50 for commercial and industrial. So that hasn't been proposed to be changed. But that is the revenue that we're targeting. And then finally, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. We're still waiting for detailed information from the Treasury, but the guidance so far is to record this coming in the next biennium, $2.3 million for the city of Sandy, and we've parked it in the general fund's contingency for the time being. Just a couple other things to point out. The departments may touch on some of this. I think tonight we'll cover the Aquatic Center fund, but you'll see that it reflects status quo from the previous biennium of keeping it, keeping the utilities, some supplies, but the same amount of funding. We're completing a number of master plans. A lot of those have carryover expenses into the biennium with the TSP, the Water Master Plan, the Parks Master Plan, all being currently worked on and will be completed the next fiscal year. We've set our general fund contingency at our policy of 5% of operations. And then on top of that, we have the department contingencies with our budgeting approach. They get to keep their carryovers. That the 5% plus the department contingencies are an important factor for us in our things like our bond rating. We were just rated last week and got our bond rating of AA- affirmed and confirmed by S&P. So a good thing for the city to maintain that bond rating even during a pandemic where they haven't been so kind to other folks. So combined department beginning balance in some of those funds. This is a change that you may notice if you were on the budget committee before. For some reason, we used to show beginning fund balances in funds in multiple departments. If you had an operating department and a capital department in a fund, it was confusing for me, so I'm sure it was confusing for council and other members of the public. So we decided just to lump them into one beginning fund balance. That way we don't show negative fund balances within a fund when there isn't a negative fund balance. It would just be department specific, which again is doesn't quite make sense because the resources all come into the fund. And then to touch on these trends, I talked about COVID and sort of the impact on the workforce, but we did have an impact on both staffing and some of our revenue, especially last spring, and then kind of the lingering effects for some of our departments like recreation and seniors especially, where we did lose revenue and had to halt programming and rentals and things like that. Our senior center has been closed. We haven't seen any new guidance on when that service may be a part of the framework for reopening. And gas taxes took a little bit of a hit in April and May of last year, but not surprisingly, as you probably noticed with traffic, they quickly bounced back. So I think we ended up losing maybe $70,000 or $80,000 because of the shutdowns. And because of the COVID-19 closures, because of the slowdown in recreation and senior programming and library services being kind of closed for a while, we did do some staffing adjustments. We had to do a couple layoffs in community services and then reduce hours in community services and in the library. That has helped us kind of offset the full brunt of the impact. Of course, didn't make up for all of the revenue loss at all, but at least helped kind of slow the bleeding, so to speak. On the other side, development activity continued to be really strong through the pandemic. Maybe slowed down for a week or two during the initial shutdown last spring, but picked right back up. And as the council knows, a lot of development has been in the pipeline and continues to be so. There's a lot of pre-apps in the works. So development continues to be strong. And you saw how property taxes kind of continue to grow at a steady pace. And then to flip back to impacts, personnel services, as you saw with the operating budget, like most years, continue to increase because of things like PERS, which almost $500,000 impact with the PERS rate increases. Benefits, again, you can always expect annual increases in benefits, but this budget also reflects the implementation of the compensation study and pay equity analysis that was implemented last summer. That was about $160,000 to implement that, the results of that study, which kept us at our policy of paying at the medium range of similar cities. So we corrected a lot of that and with the pay equity and then bringing employees' wages up to our comparable cities. So the salaries, benefits, PERS all increased despite FTEs not going up much. Our personal service expenses continue to be a major driver for our operating budget. And really that next line about the pressures on the operating budget comes from that, and just the perennial task of us as local government elected officials and managers to manage that pressure and continue to look for ways to look for new revenue, cut expenses, become more efficient. We like the previous biennium, we see a lot of the department carryovers being kind of used for ongoing expenses, which really is not the intent of a carryover. The carryover should be spent on capital, should be spent on one-time expenses. But in this case, we're again finding that it's sort of using as a way to float us as we work on these type of strategies to become more efficient. Look at it, opportunities for attrition if necessary, and then have conversations with the council like we did before the pandemic about major initiatives like the recreation district. Our recreation department, is an area that the council wants to look at in terms of increasing recreation opportunities for the community. That can include, the opportunity for an aquatics and recreation center, expanding programming. But in the meantime, we need to look at things like cost recovery and, what kind of programs the community wants and how we're going to pay for that. And then, it sets us up to have those bigger conversations about what does parks and recreation services look like in the city of Sandy. But I was looking back at the previous biennium and I was looking at the same issue that we had then with looking at what the beginning balances were in the general fund departments, what the ending fund balances. They're very similar to what we see in this proposed budget. So I have to say, Sandy does a good job of budgeting pretty conservatively, and kind of thinking of worst case scenarios. And I think with the pandemic, we kind of, tightened our belts. We held some positions vacant for a while or still have, and we're able to kind of manage through that system. But, like a lot of governments, we always see those lines crossing as we, extrapolate out a couple of years with just the rise of ongoing expenses and our revenues. Like I said, property taxes help us kind of make up that difference. But ultimately, if things change or the trends do change, we could be in a worse situation. And then finally, as I talked about before, substantial new debt service that's coming online for the wastewater project, but also full faith and credit bonds for the 362nd Bell Street and the LED projects, which are all valid, and debt is the way you pay for big projects. And then we pay that through collecting things like gas taxes or increased rates to pay off that. So utility rate increases are reflected in the utility budgets, which we'll cover on May 3rd. But in sewer, water, I think even stormwater has a very small increase, are all built into this budget as an assumption. I threw this graph in here just to show kind of all the stuff that's going on. It's also another chance for me to plug our new website that has features like a map and drop downs for different types of applications and projects that are going on in town that you can click on and find out more information about. But this is, I think, all pending or applications that have been submitted for land use applications, these little dots. So if you can get a lot more dots than that if you include approved applications. There's Shaling Meadows and other subdivisions and developments that have been already approved. But this is another trend line that I was talking about, the property tax growth, and here's the assessed value and market value in Sandy, and really that market value just taking off after the recession, and that gap between assessed value and market value, which can create compression issues if it gets too close, has really accelerated. So another good sign of what is happening in Sandy. I know this market value issue can be tough for folks like Councilor Exner as you're trying, or people that are looking for a home in Sandy, which can be very competitive right now. I know that market's tough pretty much everywhere, but for our budget wise, it's a good trend. Personnel services, I did talk about this, and this graph also shows a similar trend with that increase, even with not a lot of new staff. You know, just the major drivers of PERS and benefits and implementing the compensation plan puts those pressures on our budget. And this is that graph that I mentioned or that chart I was talking about, where we show what the beginning balances are at the start of the biennium and what the essentially the ending balances are, which are the contingencies, the carryovers, and you know, have the change here, but you can see that a lot of them are less. And this is a similar situation we saw 2 years ago, and I was talking about the our managers did a good job of holding the line and adjusting. But this is always sort of like, yeah, here's a trend that we probably wanted to pay attention to, that we're dipping into our carryover balances. And some of these departments are doing maybe doing plans or small projects with their carryover, but a lot of them it's to kind of fund, maintain our service levels, which is a great goal to do, but it can create problems in the out years as we get beyond this biennium, unless we kind of do a similar thing and manage to that gap. For example, with like planning and building, one of the things that we want to look at is, are we really getting a good cost recovery? And how do we compare in our fees and charges when we're charging developers and builders for planning applications and building permits?
What's happening with non-departmental there?
Oh yeah, so the non-departmental is where our contingency is for the general fund. So that includes our 5% reserve policy plus the $2.3 million.
2.3 million.
Yeah.
ARPA? Okay.
Yep. So in the budget message, I mentioned a couple additional things, the kind of questions that we're posing to the committee for recommendations on, in addition to your review of the budget. In the general fund contingency, we explicitly I wanted to call out that there's about $300,000 that's over our policy minimum of 5%. So this is unassigned fund balance that can be used for anything. It could be left there as just part of our reserves. It could be allocated to different departments. It could be transferred to other funds. But this is basically what was left of our carryover surplus from general revenue because we collected more taxes than we expected, et cetera, and from what we allocated at the departments. I'm sure the general fund departments would love to have that fully allocated, but they're, as you see, they're balanced. They haven't had to cut services, and we want to provide the opportunity for the council and the budget committee to maybe wrestle with this. There's $300,000. There's a lot of needs in the city. Maybe the members of the public might have some ideas. And so there's some additional funding there to play with, so to speak. And then also, because we don't have guidance from the Treasury yet on the exact mechanics of the American Rescue Plan money, how it's to be spent, we have general parameters. They're maybe less, they're maybe more than general. They get pretty specific on what we can spend it on. I think, the council might want to hear the budget committee's, recommendations, or maybe this is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on how that money may be, spent. I think it's probably too early yet to actually appropriate it, but maybe providing the council recommendation on things to consider or ideas would probably be valid and helpful for us. As staff, we've been developing some ideas. I'm sure the council and other members of the public have ideas based on what these parameters are, the big ones being investments in infrastructure and water and sewer broadband, but also, pretty general, flexible, rules around this in terms of providing assistance to businesses or nonprofits. Revenue loss recovery for the city is another big one. Pretty much the only thing you can't spend it on, which we want to check on infrastructure, because we're not sure about transportation infrastructure. It's not explicitly called out in the act, but we can't reduce taxes and we can't deposit into a pension fund. That's the only things we can't do with it. Some of the work that we did in advance and per that revenue loss was just to look at what our revenue impact was from the shutdowns and slowdowns. And this kind of gives you a nice snapshot of what some of those things were, what those impacts were. The biggest being gas taxes for the couple of months that things really slowed down because the traffic slowed down, and us sort of reducing our, traffic enforcement, citations, and fines also slowed down. Late fees for utilities was only about $27,000. At this point, I think we've cleared a lot of the backlog and overdue accounts, which has been great. A lot of people responded to that, and we only have a few that ultimately were shut off for the first round of shutoffs since the pandemic. So that was great. And then the big hit with recreation, just not being able to do those recreation programs and renting out the buildings and things like that. Yeah, so that's the budget message. The departments will, we have probably at least a couple hours of the department heads going through their departments. I'm happy to take general questions, but you're going to see each department in order as it is in the budget. Like I said, we're going to hold the utilities for the next meeting, but specific questions about departments and funds would be great to hold those.
Part of that court fee decline, was that offset a little bit by lower court costs? Because I noticed that the court costs had gone down within the budget too. Was that because there were fewer times that we had the judge there or that we held court?
Not necessarily. There's some small costs of that, but there was also the cost of keeping things clean and all that small amount. But no, I think that's more related to how staffing has changed with administration in court. We've kind of reorganized, and in administration we have this assistant to the city manager, city recorder, and then the part-time court clerk. Tyler can go into that I think he's one of the first departments up after this. But
I have one other question. You talked about having to downsize or lay off people from from the senior center for the library. Are those people still going to be first in line, or they have, that when we get back up to speed and everything's open, are there going to be rehires, or have they moved on?
That's a good question. I actually, I don't know personally if fortunately they were part-time. The staff that were, it's always bad to do layoffs, but they were 10 to 20 hour employees or less that we had to lay off just because of the nature of the work. So we, if we do, like, for example, we are hiring a driver again and welcoming applications for that to try to, get back to doing more Meals on Wheels and senior trips and things like that. But they would be, thank you, they would be welcome to apply for that.
Any other questions of Jordan before we move on to the presentations? Kathleen, unmute yourself.
Hi, hey, great presentation, Jordan. Is it possible for Jeff to kind of post up on the city website real quick your PowerPoint and the PowerPoints, because you kind of were going through them and I was like, oh, wait a minute, there was, and so, yeah.
Sure.
If you could just post those and the ones for the department heads, that would be helpful for us to kind of be able to digest them. But great overview. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. We can do that. Thank you.
I got a question. Is there any plans for COLA freezes for at least 1 or maybe 2 years?
It's a great question. There's not. What the budget assumes is, I think built in is a 2% in the first year, 3%. It's conservative. We base it on the CPI, which is 1.6. One of the issues that, the way we do COLAs is, one, we tie it to the CPI, but also we want to know what other cities are doing. We fell behind in the past, and that's why we had to do this big pay equity and compensation study. It's a value for me, and I think it's a value for the city council that we don't do that again, because it creates a bigger problem in the future. So we, keep tabs on what other cities are doing. Are they giving COLAs? A lot of them are unionized, so they have, a collar, or they have, already built in the contracts. So at this point, budget, has 2% built in, but it's looking like 1.6% would be the first year COLA.
And that's for non-represented too, right?
Yeah, that's across the board. Police is, I forget, Tyler, was it caller of 2 and 4?
2 to 4, yep. So they have a minimum 2% that is built into the budget as well.
Any other questions? Mr. Hokinson? Unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. Had to put my hand down too in order, and it's always confusing to me. So Jordan, I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I apologize to everybody for that in advance, because I probably won't apologize in the next few times. But when you make a decision to put money into a new park that may or may not be completed, that hasn't been necessarily penciled out yet, and we don't make a decision to put money into an aquatic center, which, you know, is part of that goal, that in terms of expanding recreational activities, why the bias one over the other?
So it's a great question. There's two ways to answer it. One, the new park is paid for by, you know, parks SDCs, which is restricted for new park development. And so that, you know, for anything new, we can't shuffle that money from like parks capital into the pool. And maybe if we were expanding, I don't know, some nuance there of like how SDCs can be spent. In terms of, you know, ongoing revenue and operating something like recreation or seniors or police, that's coming from general revenue, and that would include the aquatic center. And ultimately, you know, it's a council goal. There's a committee that's working on the aquatic center. I'm sure, you know, Tanya will go into that with her presentation. So, you know, it will be a council decision if we reopen the aquatic center. The last decision was made 2 years ago to close it. And, you know, we'll continue to work with the council and the community. And, you know, there is funding that there is unrestricted fund balance that we set aside for the council to play with if, you know, that becomes a source of funding for looking at a reopening or something. That's certainly an idea that I think we've thought about. But, you know, we're just following council direction that the pool, you know, is closed until that, you know, the plan and decision is made on the future of aquatics.
I would just pitch in that part of the contingency was used in this last biennium to pay for polling and different research that went into that rec district. So it's not unheard of for contingency funds from the general fund to go towards research for the aquatic center project.
Any more questions of Jordan?
One more, Jordan. My apologies. For when building your budget, and I see there's membership fees, conference, budgeted for conferences, etc. Was there any thought about freezing that amount or cutting that amount by half due to COVID, and that we're probably not going to be out of the upswing of this till another year?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this in a couple different ways again too. So you know, the honest answer is the way we do budgeting with expenditure control is it's ultimately up to the departments, you know, they get their general revenue allocation. This is in the general fund. It's up to the departments to manage, you know, per the council goals and per our overall like general direction. But within, you know, their line items, they can budget however, you know, they need. It's a great question because you're right. For this first year especially, there's probably a lot of conferences are going to be virtual. I know there's a lot that are already moving towards in person though. In fact, I think, you know, this summer there's a couple conferences in Bend. I'm like, well, I won't be making it, but I know they're happening. So we are kind of coming back to that reality. The other benefit of this last year is that some of that carryover, like in say for example, the city council was because they didn't go to like LOC conferences and things like that. So that just carries over into that department as, you know, a resource in the next year. But no, even though you're not doing in person, you're saving on hotels and travel. We don't do, honestly, a lot of out-of-state travel with the city of Sandy for conferences. Most of it is in state associations and things like that. And I really encourage employees to do that. I think we actually need to be doing more training here. And so I want to make sure that employees are investing in their development and professional development. And if that's virtual meetings, they still cost money. I found that out this last year. So no, we wanted to keep those intact.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like education training is important, but there's two distinct line items, one for conferences and one for employee training. And so I was just trying to distinguish between the two.
This is how I usually think of it. Tyler might have a different answer, but it's like local trainings, like classes you can take that are like, you know, you see someone sending an email about project management training or something, and it's like $200 for the day or whatever. Conferences is when you got to go someplace and maybe it's multi-day or all day and has a bigger fee attached to it. Maybe travel.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I guess I have one little housekeeping thing to do.
Kathleen had her hand up, sorry.
Sorry, Linda.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Quick, one easy one, just when you guys talk about information technology, is that just the inner workings of the computer stuff, employees' computers and not SandyNet? That's an easy question. And then, but the bigger question I had was, so you talked about the increase in revenue from property taxes and all that. And so there was at least 5%, and, you know, I kind of saw 8% and 13% in the narrative. So, and I heard there was a COLA of 1.6% and presumably some more increases in PERS that was probably more than 1.6%. But so those are kind of, you know, the somewhat non-discretionary things. So when folks were developing their budget, especially for the general fund type stuff, was there some sort of any kind of direction given? Like, you know, obviously they have, you know, they need to cover the COLA, they need to cover the PERS, you know, but things over and above that, as we start hearing all the different departments, I don't want to have to ask the same question, but was there some sort of direction kind of overall to the different departments? Did some people get, you know, more, like I saw the libraries didn't change anything in their use of general fund stuff, but other departments did. And so I'm just kind of curious if there was any overreaching direction as to which departments got kind of bumps and other ones kind of held the line or otherwise. Thanks.
Hold the line is typically our direction. It's been sort of the mantra for decades in government. It's, you know, unless we explicitly talk about it or it's a council goal, we're not, you know, adding staff. Adjustments within personnel, if you can make them happen, you know, adjusting FTEs for part-time staff, for example. There's a couple new positions that are proposed, one, like I said, and one in engineering public works, and then one in SandyNet. But overall, it's, you know, the message is told the departments to hold the line. That, and again, I do bring this up a lot because it is so unique. There's only a couple cities that do expenditure control budgeting in this way. They're giving their general revenue allocation, and the general revenue plus their department revenue is their target. They can't exceed that, right? And so they're already constrained just by the amount of revenue that their departments get. So we don't do a whole like budget games of budget requests and, you know, several meetings of reviews. They don't come with a proposal to me that I then, you know, do negotiations with them. Like, we give them their revenue and they say, here's your line. You can't spend any more than this. So that's kind of the easy way to keep, you know, expenditure control is based on how much revenue I'm going to give you. And Tyler and I do this kind of behind the scenes thing, right? Like, we're getting, you know, over 8% in general revenues. That's what we will typically allocate out. But then we're also doing council goal setting at the same time. So things like the comp plan, you know, we need to carve out enough funding for the comp plan. So we make sure that's going in the right place to fund that council goal. But other than that, it's basically, you know, straight like, you know, this is what you got last year. We're getting another 8% in general revenue. This is what you're going to get this next year. And they kind of anticipate that. They know that's the process. And then they just manage to that line.
Okay, any other questions? So I'll do a little housekeeping here. I meant to do this at the beginning, but before each of our meetings, I'm going to ask for if there are any conflicts of interest regarding the budget. Even though we're not voting at every meeting, we won't be voting in probably till the third meeting. But I'll call for any conflict of interest on the budget. Seeing none, we will go on to the department presentations. After each department makes a presentation, I'll call
Linda, I'm sorry.
Oh.
So I don't have a clear understanding of that, but because I was on the budget committee 2 years ago and this never came up. But I guess somebody raised it.
You understand, yes.
So somebody else raised it this time. And so, I talked with Jordan a little bit about it and just talked to him about that the understanding, I guess I was told a couple things. I spoke to David Doofman, but I also spoke with somebody, the OGC or state folks, and they said that because, again, like I said, this never came up, but it was the same situation before. Because this is an advisory committee, this is not, no decisions are being made. So, it could be a potential conflict of interest, but there is no actual conflict of interest. Again, I was never made aware of this before and the circumstances were the same. So I will declare a potential conflict of interest, but again, I don't think anything's changed since then. The other thing I would just talk to Jordan a little bit about is just kind of, the things that kind of come about is that all the employees got, just for everybody else's benefit, I assume everybody else knows, but my husband works for the city and worked for the city 2 years ago when I was on the budget committee, but again, never came up. But there's COLAs of 1.6% increase. There's presumably PERS increases that are non-discretionary, I guess. And I guess I'm going to leave it up to Jordan. I kind of asked him, is there opportunities to kind of carve out parts of the budget that, Mike's salary comes out of and things like that. And I'm going to let Jordan talk about that later if it becomes necessary or, whenever he wants to. So anyway,
Councilor Walker and Chair Malone, thank you for asking for the conflicts. That's what Councilor Walker was advised, is to declare a potential conflict during the budget committee proceedings, but can still vote on the budget, because at this point, since it's a recommendation to the city council, it's only a potential conflict.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
And then when we get to the city council adoption of the budget, we can easily pull out the 4 utility funds and that the individual salaries are in. So it's just 4 funds, and have 2 votes, one on everything but those 4 funds, and then have a vote on those 4 funds that Councilor Walker can abstain from.
And I have a little question about that, just as an aside. When I was on the council, you could declare a conflict of interest, but declare also that you could make an impartial decision, that part of the budget or that part of what you're deciding, that you could be impartial and make a decision on it. And if people wanted to challenge it, they thought because of your husband working for the city, you couldn't be impartial. They could challenge it, but you could declare that you had a conflict, but that you could make an impartial decision. Can you not do that now?
I can't speak to the past and if anything has changed in the law, but the legal advice on this case is that it is because there is a monetary benefit of voting to approve someone's wages, that is a person that lives in your household and is a spouse, it is a conflict of interest as defined by the OGEC. And our advice, the legal advice, was to just declare that and not vote on those 4 funds where that individual is funded out of.
Well,
so I don't know if that's something changed in the past or not, or you can, whether now there actually is a conflict by law that, as you read the law and as lawyers interpret that, is how it's defined, and in this case would be a conflict.
Well, as you stated, that will be something for the city council to deal with, not the budget committee, because we're just advisory. So we will move on now. I know that we're taking the street fund out and moving it to the next meeting.
Yeah, we felt that it was just easier to focus on the general fund and all the miscellaneous funds, and then do all the utilities in the next night. So May 3rd will be urban renewal for the first half of the meeting, and then get into the utility funds and budget committee deliberations and see how far we get. And then we have May 10th set aside too if we need to continue deliberations.
Well, we'll start with the general fund then and go for that overview or presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, give me just a moment to share my screen and then we'll get started. Everyone see that all right?
Yep.
All right. So as Chair Malone already pointed out, we have an agenda for this evening, the budget message. We're into the department budgets now, and then we'll move on to public comment later in this evening. And then May 3rd, as Jordan already indicated, urban renewal and other department budgets, and then May 10th if needed. And here are the budgets we'll be discussing this evening. As Jordan said, a lot of miscellaneous funds, and then obviously the general fund. And to kick us off, Jordan.
Oh boy, you get to listen to me talk again. These will be really brief because they're small, and not to say small as inconsequential or anything, but I'll try to be brief on these ones. But before I do, I just want to mention, we will have time at the next meeting to do full sale deliberations and any changes that the budget committee may want to make. It might be best just in terms of the flow of meetings. If you have questions, we'll take notes. If we need to get back to you, we'll let you know, like we'll write them down, and maybe if everyone submits questions tonight or the next day, we can get back to you by the end of the week. And then we can get into the deliberations, any changes and negotiations and debate among the budget committee at the May 3rd or May 10th meeting. But we're happy to take questions throughout these department presentations. Please do while the department directors are presenting, because it's a lot easier, I think, with Zoom than having to unmute and bring people in and stuff. So Mayor and Council, this is your budget. It's no personnel services. Our counselors are volunteers, of course. Thank you for your service. We do appreciate it. We try to budget enough for you to attend conferences and do your memberships, and that's the bulk of the materials and services there. Transfers, so we increased our general revenue to the City Council to really reflect the indirect charges that we updated our administrative cost overhead indirect service charge calculation. So we wanted to make sure this department was balanced by having enough general revenue to cover those transfers. There really isn't a whole lot to highlight in the mayor and council budget. It's pretty status quo. We budgeted enough for you guys to attend conferences like the LOC, which I'm not sure if I think they alternate between Bend and Portland. So usually we budget for a majority of counselors to do that. And then memberships, there's a variety of memberships like LOC, Oregon Mayors Association, Greater Portland Inc., and things like that. Really not a big expense, and I think worth the investment. That's the budget. Any questions from City Council on your budget? I always have to stop and ask that, make sure. Okay. Great, move on. So administration.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Oh, I can't see, okay.
I'm sorry, I was trying to raise my hand. Madam Chair, how would you like us to, do you want us to hit the raise hand button or just bust in with unmuting, or what's your preference? You gotta unmute yourself. Can't hear you, Linda.
Hopefully I'll just see your hand raised, but if not, just unmute yourself and say, I've got a question. I had to go answer the door for a second there.
So my question was just that it showed that like overhead, and maybe I can understand the rationale for this, but overhead, we're getting tapped like almost 50% overhead. Is that just because you guys are the main players in our world there, Jordan and Jeff? Is that?
Well, yes, it's allocated to a lot of other functions too. So legal is another one, right?
Oh yeah, okay.
But I mean, if you think about, the amount of time there's different ways to do a cost allocation for mayor and council. You can do it by agenda items, you can do it by meetings and things like that. But this is, I think, we're trying to get more accurate in spreading out the cost. And like I said, we just covered that by giving it more general revenue too, to offset it. But we're just trying to be more transparent of spreading this out to IT, legal, administration, all the other departments.
Jordan, if I can jump in, this might be a good time just to touch on indirect costs before we get numerous departments in. So all of our direct service departments, any department that is outward facing to the public. So the city council department, library, police, senior services, recreation, all of those types of functions pay an indirect cost to those departments that are more behind the scenes, like administration, finance, legal, IT, and then a little bit into the non-departmental to pay for some general city overhead costs. And so when we talk about transfers between departments or between some of the funds, a lot of those transfers are those indirect costs from outward facing departments paying for the cost of service for the behind the scenes functions.
Thanks, Tyler. Okay, we move on, administration. All right, another small department. It's just a couple of FTEs, and really it's me, Jeff, and parts of a few others, which I guess you can call the city manager's office or administration. Again, personal services. Oh, we need an E there. Personal services increase with the addition of basically another 0.5 FTE. We converted the half-time city recorder / accountant position to, and this is in the current biennium, to assistant to the city manager / city recorder, which is Jeff, and he's been fantastic and asset for us to have that full-time position. And then also the compensation study and all the other things I mentioned about personnel services. Materials is pretty minimal, you know, back to that point about kind of holding, you know, tightening our belt and holding the line on things like conferences and stuff, which we sort of alternate if we do any conferences, and try to limit our travel. You know, overall, not much in terms of, you know, services like capital or anything like that that come out of this department. It really is just personnel with the city administration. Go ahead, Tyler. A couple of things I just want to highlight. I mentioned, you know, bringing on the city recorder assistant to the city manager. Jeff has been instrumental in all the communication improvements that we're doing and will continue to do. Our new website, all those features that we're talking about with like the maps. We're getting a new online municipal code, which will be fantastic to be able to navigate that thing a lot easier and update. So that's in the works, more of a social media presence. So we'll continue to work on that, on those efforts. We always have the general, like, you know, city manager is responsible for implementing the city council goals. So that's our focus, and we'll continue to work with the council on supporting them on a number of their goals, like the homelessness task force and social services and the pool and aquatics committee. You know, I mentioned we want to continue to look at improving public engagement, and that includes expanding into becoming more inclusive and equitable in how we do that work and getting more participation from, you know, maybe underinvested communities in Sandy. And that aligns with us wanting to continue to move forward with our work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're really just starting off on this journey. Our staff has now completed 2 trainings as sort of our first steps into this important work, but we have a long ways to go. And so we'll continue to work with staff, form staff committees, and think about how we can then engage with the bigger community in helping us with this work. A couple other things that we're working on too, and we'll continue to be on a work plan. Implementing the resiliency plan for city operations is one. You know, looking for opportunities to you know, implement more infrastructure improvements for our city facilities. We're looking at working with our legislative delegation to maybe see about funding for infrastructure and other items for the city of Sandy, either through the state or federal grants. And so we'll continue those efforts. And those have been a focus in the last few weeks, especially as there seems to be a lot of money and opportunities flying around. Any questions on administration? Great. I can't see hands raised either. I should maybe change my view here.
We'll both be looking for you, Jordan.
Okay.
I don't.
Tyler, if you can
have
change your view or
everybody on
something
my screen.
too.
Maybe Jeff has everybody on his screen and can tell.
I
Yeah,
can speak up if there's a hand raised as well. Yeah.
perfect. Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate that.
Legal is a really quick one. We use Barry Elser Hammond as our city attorney. We have for a number of years. They provide services on a number of different legal, issues for the city. Ranging from governance issues to land use, contracting, personnel. So using a firm instead of just having a city attorney is helpful for a city of our size because we get that expertise with a number of different attorneys that work for the firm. They work with a number of cities, especially smaller towns in the state of Oregon. We're increasing the budget here. There's a couple big reasons for this. The biggest one is land use. We have had a lot of land use applications with challenges, complexities like Shaley Meadows with development agreements and challenges and appeals. So we're sort of anticipating that kind of environment with development to continue. So we wanted to make sure we budgeted enough to cover that. It's also just been a more active time. Some of the stuff around wastewater and that project and the complexities of working with regulatory agencies has really taken more attorney time. As the city's kind of grown up and is dealing with more complex and difficult issues, we need more legal assistance. So that's a driver for that increase. If you look at historic trends, though, it's kind of gone up and down, and that can all depend on what's happening at the city. But the other reason is there's a slight rate increase, hourly increases that they have asked for. So we're including that. This is the first rate increase that I've seen. I think they haven't done one in a number of years. So I think it's justified. But that's a legal budget. Any questions?
Jeremy.
Yeah, I just, do you know what the actual so far to date on this biennium would be for the legal? We at the 200, past the 200?
We're pretty close. Tyler, are we passed it yet? We actually charged a number of things to the planning to kind of in anticipation of exceeding this budget, just being transparent on that, some of these land use issues.
As of March 31st, we had spent $193,000 so far in the biennium. So we're getting right up against that $200,000 mark. This is an item that we may need to revisit before the end of the biennium with the supplemental budget to adjust just to make sure we don't go over our appropriations.
So I guess that would be my, thank you for that, would be my concern is 250 enough because of the things that you've stated, Jordan. We also know that we have a couple things in the hopper for land, LUBA, as well as the wastewater and everything else that will be coming forward. So and maybe some of those will be pulled out of planning or some other fund as well. But you can see in 15-17, we're at 203, but as the costs go up and more activity, I'd just be concerned 250 may be low. I know we can transfer money later into it, like you said, but that'd be my concern.
Kathleen.
Is there somewhere in here that shows what these sources are for the 250, it says indirect service revenue. Is that coming out of the general fund or is that coming out of planning permit fees or is it just a hodgepodge of different things and what? I guess mostly my concern is how much is coming out of the general fund versus the utility, stuff that the planning and the other pots.
So Councilor Walker, you have the full description of our indirect service costs allocation on page 102 of the budget document.
Right.
That has it broken down by department within the general fund as well as other funds that are paying into each of the indirect service departments.
But does that kind of clarify whether or not, like when the, recreation or planning or whatever is putting into that, it doesn't kind of say whether it's coming out of the general fund versus the utility fees. I guess that was my question. I saw that one table there on 102.
So all of our departments into it, and then the department that has legal expenses just allocates or codes their invoices to this specific department. So we don't really, during the biennium, track on a case-by-case legal basis. We use a prior kind of rolling average of what departments have used with a little bit of administrative oversight to adjust accordingly. But we don't, on the expense side, break it down by department when we're actually coding the invoices.
Yeah, my question had more just kind of what flavor of dollars is being used, not, whether somebody's using more than they put in. Is it the wastewater utility fees paying for the wastewater, or is, that was kind of my question. It was whether, my biggest concern is general fund dollars versus, for the other stuff, planning and stuff, I'm assuming they could be using their other fees and stuff to pay for their legal fees, but that was my question, is just kind of how much general fund, and it doesn't have to be answered now. It's just kind of a question that came up.
Okay, we'll look into that.
On page 102, Tyler, you go to the top where it says 26 legal and the bottom line of 250,000, all those various line items, the 60,000 from planning, 4,000 from building, all those add up. That's where all the funds are coming from. And since most of those funds are funded by general fund, it's basically just a divvying up of the general funds that would be allocated to those departments into legal, or the part they use. I mean, that's where you get the 250,000 is a little bit from each.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Move on.
A couple other hands up still.
Okay, all right. Where were the hands? Stan.
Yeah, just and then just so you know, it looks like Jan Lee and then Noah also have hands up, just to make it a little easier for you, Linda. Okay. My question is, when was the last, since we're going through what sounds like it's going to be a rate increase, and I know that some of these legal challenges haven't necessarily gone the direction we all would know and love in the past. What are staff's plans to go into an RFP type process to look around at our options in legal representation?
No plans right now. I think our contract, I'd have to go back and look. The last RFP was like maybe 3 or 5 years ago.
So as an insurance professional, I know for a fact that best practice is to go out for RFP probably around now then.
I think there's a lot of value in institutional memory of lawyers we've had for 30 years plus, but.
Well, sure, but I guess my question just is, as we're allocating money, I'd be interested in being able to compare institutional knowledge up into, competitive firms and all that. So it's just something that's on my mind as we go through this. I wanted to put out there as I am curious in a look at an RFP process for our attorney representation.
Thank you, Stan. Jordan, did you have any response?
No, I mean, ultimately the council, makes that decision. So if they want us to look at that, and I'm happy to get more information about when the last time we did an RFP or renewed the contract.
Okay. Jan, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question about the legal expenses, because I'm aware that 2 LUBA processes, which the city is going to be involved in, are fairly spendy, and especially if the city were to lose, it would be a double cost. So I don't see where 250,000 is adequate. And my other question about legal is, so much of the planning process is charged against the department. But if the department makes a recommendation and the planning commission makes a recommendation to move forward with the project, and then the council votes to appeal, that cost should really not be part of the planning department cost. It should be part of the administrative legal costs. So that's the question I have, is how that's calculated, because it doesn't seem like it's adequate, and it doesn't seem like it works well, given where we are.
I think it's hard to anticipate things like LUBA appeals until we know. I mean, it could go a number of different ways, or 3 different ways. So it is, something that you can, if we budgeted for losing all LUBA appeals, I would probably advise against that. But it's one of those things that's for us to be aware of. If, that does happen in this next biennium, we could take it out of this department. And if this department then needs a supplemental at the end of the year because of that, then we can make that transfer from general fund contingency. I don't think we would charge the planning department for those fees directly. I think it would come from the general fund contingency or from this department. I think it's too much of an unknown to budget for that, of whether it would win or lose a case or how many and what that charge would be. There's some control we can have over legal, honestly. I have some of that control. Other staff members have some of that control. Council members have some of that control, because it's purely a charge by hour. So every email, every phone call, every meeting is a charge. I try to be, pretty reasonable. Like we don't have legal representation at this meeting. As expenses rack up, I'm like, oh, do I really need to call the city attorney right now? But you also, honestly, I don't think it's, I like to err on the side of getting legal representation. Of course, there's a balance of, having questions that maybe can be answered in another way, but I don't want to discourage staff from going through the proper channels, getting contract reviewed, getting their legal questions answered. So we don't want to, put that sort of pressure on departments not to use legal services. And I guess that's a long way to answer, is this budget enough? The hard thing is, in this world, it's just hard to know. We base it on experience. As you look, it's pretty consistent with prior years. And base it on some level of unknowns. That's, some of the increase there. But we really, until you go through a year of, what kind of challenges you're going to have, how many meetings, what kind of, legal issues, you really don't know.
How long has it been since there was a LUBA case?
Oh,
I can't think of one in the last several years.
Yeah, it's a decade or so.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jeff, are there any other hand raises?
Yes.
I can't see any.
Got 3 of them up yet, so.
Well, I didn't see a hand raise. So Carl.
I'll take my hand.
You're muted, Carl.
I took my mute instead of my hand down. So I guess one is a reminder. We do have a pretty good sized contingency fund that we can draw from if things go bigger, and the council has a ability to increase or change by 10% without going back to the process again. So if we do get a bunch of additional legal costs, I would assume that we would use the percentages that we have used to get to this 250 to increase it to 350, 450, whatever it might increase to. Is that right? That first question.
We can absolutely make a change to increase it. I would probably caution against changing that with the same methodology that we have built into it currently, because that does impact all direct service departments. So if you increase this to 350 or 400,000, that's going to have a big impact to a department like, say, the library maybe, or police, or any other things that aren't really relevant to the specific legal question that's come up a couple times, which was related to LUBA appeals. So it might be, more beneficial to look at a one-time transfer from contingency to offset those expenses versus using this existing methodology for possible legal exposure that we don't know is
answers it. Then the second question is, or not question, more of a statement. We've had a couple of legal advisors and just the last couple of months that I wasn't terribly impressed with the experience. So to me, going out for an RFP would be reasonable at this time. Certainly we have some folks with Dave, long-term understanding of our abilities, but some of the folks that they've gotten to come in and sub for Dave, I don't think it would be a problem at all for me to go after an RFP for looking at what we could get. Anytime I go after my insurance after a year or two, I look at competitive, and I always make a way to save some money that way with my house and home insurance. So just an opinion.
Okay, I don't see any hands.
Got a couple more, Chair Malone. Noah is the first one on my screen.
Yeah, quick question. So are there explicit interagency agreements between the departments, so the outer facing or the interfacing to the outer facing, about how much will be given to each one of these departments?
Yeah, no formal agreements. No, just through this process.
Okay.
And then committee members,
Dawn?
I see one more
Your
hand.
hand is raised, Dawn.
Thank you. So I just want to echo what Carl said. I think the contingency is the right spot to deal with the uncertainty factors. So I agree with that. And I also support the RFP.
Okay. It's doubled on the screen share. I see no other raised hands. So back to Tyler or Jordan.
I think that's my part. Tyler's going to do the next couple, and then we'll go through the rest of the department heads. Thank you.
All right, so next up is Municipal Court. So as you may be aware, the City of Sandy operates our own Municipal Court here for mostly traffic citations and violations. It does receive a general fund contribution, some fines, fees, and assessments. That's mostly associated with payment plan fees or suspension fees when we do suspend a license. Charge a small fee for that to cover the sort of extra work that the court clerk is processing on those citations. And then on a personnel services side, we just have 0.65 FTE in this department. It's kind of hovered around that number for quite a while. Mostly we've just been able to become more efficient with new software, more electronic means of doing our work, which has been really helpful, especially during the pandemic. And about $21,000 in contingency for any unforeseen expenses there. Over the course of this biennium, we became even more paperless. We have probably 90 to 95% paperless ability in this department right now. We've added some additional features on the website to allow for more self-service options, like setting up payment arrangements and completing an auto-pay enrollment for those people that are on a payment plan. Estimated to see just under 2,000 citations processed through the court by the end of this biennium. We did cancel some court services, or postpone rather, some court services at the beginning of the pandemic for about 2 months. But since then, we've been conducting all of our trials in person in a safe manner, but doing our initial appearances either via phone, email, or on a case-by-case basis at the front counter by appointment. And then going into the upcoming biennium, we really want to finalize our e-filing system with the DMV. That would get us to probably 99% paperless, would increase efficiencies both internally and with the DMV, and just a quicker turnaround time for reinstatement of licenses or suspension of licenses and that sort of thing. Any questions on municipal court?
I have one. So I think a couple things. Is this number of citations, is that kind of up or down from historical numbers of citations? And
I don't have that readily available, but I can definitely look into that for you.
Okay, and then I think we talked about this maybe at a previous meeting because I remember asking the question, but I think it's helpful for everybody to know, because I was confused by, why are we needing to put money into this from the general revenue fund, because I assume people are, paying fines, and we should be able to, if we can't run a court, and make a profit and, pay for the judge with the fines, then, why are we doing this? Why don't we just have it go to Oregon City? And as I recall, the answer was that all the fine money goes to the police department, and that covers, I guess, the cost of the arresting officer and whatnot, but not the cost of the courts. So this is kind of just an additional allocation kind of to the police department to, as part of their kind of expenses for the whole thing.
Yes, so citation revenue does go into the police department, like you. Of the face value of the citation, there's a good chunk that goes to the county and to the state for the sort of administrative overhead of that process. I believe we're up to $71 now of every citation going to other entities. And so on a smaller citation, you know, going 11 miles per hour over the speed limit or something, you know, we're not getting a lot of money into the police department for those smaller infractions. It's definitely, you know, driving while suspended or driving uninsured that generate a little more revenue for those types of citations. We do have the municipal court sort of operating independently of the citation revenue so that we have the ability to show that the municipal court is not swayed one way or the other by the judicial ruling to get revenue in to pay for the court to operate. So the general revenue, you know, keeps that ability for the court to be impartial. There's no need to find someone guilty to get enough revenue in so that the court can operate on its own. We would never do that, but by having a standalone department and a separate revenue stream for the court, we're able to really show that transparently, that there is no sort of, you know, behind the scenes things happening to make sure that the court is able to function independently.
We don't want to follow the Coburg method. Okay. Any other questions?
All right, moving on to finance. I know this will all thrill you. So the finance department has 2.67 FTE. It's made up of myself, a human resources manager, and then some smaller percentages of some other support staff within the administrative side of the building. Get just over $770,000 of indirect service revenue. That's from all those direct facing departments. And that's to pay for the services that this department provides, which, you know, most notably payroll, accounts payable, budget, audit, all of those fun financial components that kind of happen behind the scenes. The vast majority of the budget is for personnel services. And then about 73% of materials and services is directly related to our audit. You know, in one way or another, it's an audit. Most of that is an audit expense. The annual audit not only audits the city finances, but it also audits the urban renewal fund. It generates the financial reports for that. If we spend over $750,000 in federal funds, we're required to do an additional single audit, is what it's called, for federal purposes. And so the audit and personnel are really the two heavy drivers in this department. Have about $60,000 set aside in contingency to pay for any of those one-time expenses or, you know, outlying expenses that may arise throughout the biennium. For the current biennium, we received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the first time in 16 years, and then also received the popular Annual Financial Report Award from the Government Finance Officers Association for the first time ever. So those are some pretty big accomplishments that we wanted to highlight here. Spent a lot of time over the last year, and thank you to Angie for really, you know, taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, with this one of developing and implementing COVID-19 related policies and procedures in the ever-changing pandemic world. Those have not been easy to keep up on, so we spent a lot of time working on those. As Jordan indicated during his budget message, we did implement the pay equity and compensation study, which was a pretty big project here that took quite a lot of staff time as well as some consultant time. And then we also were able to reaffirm just last week the city's bond rating of AA-, which we're going to pat ourselves on the back for a quick moment that we didn't have a downgrade or anything like that, given the pandemic that, you know, other agencies have seen some struggles there. And then moving forward, two really simple goals for this department. We want to continue to increase transparency and find creative ways to, you know, get our information out and make it easily understandable and readily available for our community members. And then working with the council and individual departments to just increase general financial stability. Any questions? I see a couple hands already. I think committee member Exner was the first hand I saw. No? Must have been Hokinson then. It was one of the two. Committee member Hokinson, did you want to unmute yourself?
Go ahead, Don.
Sorry, internet locked up there for a second.
No worries.
So for a finance guy, you went last biennium 40,000 in contingency. This year you added 50% of that contingency. You surely didn't expect anyone not to ask about that, right?
Any particular question or just a general question about the growth?
Well, a 50% increase in contingency. What are you thinking is going to happen to the finance department?
So we've actually stabilized that contingency. It used to be quite higher, and we've tried to sort of smooth it out to have some funds set aside. We did spend a little bit of money in contingency this biennium for a portion of the pay equity and compensation study, having that nice cushion there just to, be safe, really. I mean, we will be going out for an RFP for a new auditing firm next month, which will be in place before July 1st, 2021. Hopefully those expenses won't be significantly higher than what we've seen with the auditing firm we've used for the last 2 decades, but there is a possibility that there could be some increased costs there. And so, it's the general safety net that contingency is designed for. We're hopeful that we don't have to use it, but if there are some increased costs or any sort of consultant that is needed for specific project help, that's available to use for those types of things.
So I have a general concern about the way we're doing contingencies, but I'll use finance as an example of it. But when we have department contingencies and then we have overall contingencies, if we were estimating projects and cost, that would not be considered a best practice. Now I get it, in accounting it may well be, but when you describe things that may go up, I would prefer to see those may go ups in the actual budget item. You think they may go up as opposed to a 60,000 that becomes a department head choice. I would rather see budget blowouts brought up to the council level for resolution potentially, rather than otherwise. Because I think we have what, $300 and some odd thousand dollars in unallocated funds, but we have a ton of money floating in contingencies.
Yeah, part of that is just the budgeting philosophy that the city of Sandy has operated under, for a number of years, and Jordan can jump in and touch on that philosophy again if he wants to. But
you went up 50% this year from last year's contingency.
Sorry, what was that cut out?
So you went up 50% in your contingency this year.
That's correct.
Yeah, and some departments have got, a lot of them have gone down. And again, Tyler mentioned it. It is a different philosophy, a different way of budgeting with the expenditure control budgeting. But you do make a good point, Councilor Hoganson, that in indirect departments, in the support departments, you're in the right vein of questioning. Do indirect departments, support departments, need contingencies? And actually, Tyler's done pretty good job of spending down those in the indirect support departments. Finance used to be, I think, over $100,000, and we kind of made the choice to say, well, let's use that carryover for ongoing costs, because we want to bring that down so more general revenue can stay with the direct service departments. But your question of, do you need $60,000? It's a valid question. You have a few staff there, some uncertainties, but you probably won't see audit costs that much. So yeah, I mean, it's within the budget committee and the council's purview to shave off some, or take some of those contingencies. Again, we kind of manage this budget through, here's your revenue allocation, here's your target, and within that you have the flexibility of doing a contingency if you don't want to put everything into materials and services. We try to squeeze everything out of the line item so that we're not burying contingencies within the budgets and hiding them from people. But like I said, you're right to look at these support departments as like, do you really need a stabilizing, reserve fund, or can you get by with something less? The one thing so for some of these departments, as you look at the trend of them being spent down, you got to think about the future years too. Like if that's been the practice, by spending it all, and if you're not structurally balanced with your indirect service revenue or with your general revenue allocation, we may be setting ourselves up for a future next biennium issue, because we're not having that carryover for flexibility.
Thank you.
Earl.
Yeah, in that regard, just before I go to my question, big changes in the budget that the particular department wants to spend money on tend to become, or really are, part of council decisions, right? So if finance wanted to, I don't know, bring on another person to do more work, that's going to be a council decision. That's not going to be something that a department head can move forward on some differences in the budget, correct?
So yes and no. We do budget to the bottom line. So when we get to the budget adoption in June at the council level, each department within the general fund is budgeted to this total requirements number. You're budgeting a total amount of appropriations, not a specific grouping of expenditures. So within that $853,000, the total appropriations, that the director does have some fairly, wide range of discretionary or decision-making ability that they can exercise. That said, we would never hire a body without consulting with the city manager and getting Jordan's sign off on any sort of additional personnel, especially, one-time large purchases that would all get discussed through the city manager. Depending on the amount, it may or may not need to rise to the council's level, depending on the purchase authority. Our current purchasing guidelines, I don't have them in front of me, but I believe it's $50,000 for something that's not budgeted and below. The city manager can enter into that purchasing agreement. So I think that we have in the past and would continue in the future to bring items that are of importance to the council. I think it's unlikely that if we were going to spend, $5,000 on a new copier.
Yeah, I don't want to know about $5,000, but and I don't want let's keep it short here so we can move on to the next. So to me, if you're going to do something fairly substantial, somehow another councilor or the manager, city manager is going to get its hands involved in that. But I guess I'm inclined to go with Don in that I'm not sure that the 50% increase is all that defensible at the moment. So that being said, my question for you was in a AAA minus bond rating,
AA.
is there something else, something that we could do that would put that at risk? Is there something we're close to? If we get into some sort of increase in debt that we didn't realize, is there a risk in terms of suits? Is there what would be the biggest risk of dropping that from a AA minus to, I don't know what the next level is below that?
I'd be like A plus.
Tyler, I'll take a stab and then maybe you can fill in the technical. So there's a couple, so there, when you do a bond rating, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. Some of it is environmental, it's demographics, it's, what is
all the wild details. What's the biggest issues to be worried about?
They love reserves. So maintain a healthy reserve. I think one of the things the council did this last biennium was replenish the general fund reserves. I think if we hadn't done that, we'd be in a much different situation. So that 5% reserve policy plus the department carryovers give us a much better picture of our reserves in the general fund, which is very helpful. Rate stability, sticking with the plan in terms of how you're going to pay for those bonds is very important. So what are the politics? What are the plans for doing rate increases and how is those bonds going to be supported by those revenue streams is important. Yes, even factors like, as you saw probably in that statement that we circulated, factors like who's on city council and what's their experience and what's the management team's experience. And is there any outstanding legal issues or political or legislative issues that can affect the city finances? So those all play a role. But the big ones that cities usually focus on are, do we have healthy reserves? Is there any threats to our revenue streams for paying for our debt? And those are the things that we have more direct control over.
Okay, thanks.
Stanley?
Yes, I just didn't want it to go without saying how much we thank Tyler for our getting the awards and keeping us in good financial situation. And since there's only 2 people in the department, I assume a lot of that is due to him personally. So thank you, Tyler.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that.
Noah?
Yeah, first I do want to extend my thanks to Tyler and Jordan for their amazing hard work. To Dawn's point, my question really is, typically cities with departments with inward facing don't have a contingency. And if there is a contingency within those departments, they draw upon the city's contingency fund. Where outward facing or capital or departments with capital projects are able to carry over those contingency. So why, I guess my question is why we have it set up the way that we do.
You know, existing budget philosophy is each department receives, you know, whether it's indirect service allocation or general revenue, the department heads exercise their, you know, judgment on executing the functions of that department, and then to eliminate the spend it or lose it philosophy and the budget games that can come along with that. Contingencies are available for, you know, the one-off expenditures. I see Jordan unmuted himself, so I'm guessing he wants to jump in here.
Yeah, one thing we didn't get a chance to do this year is and I'm letting you guys in on sort of the inner process, is we do, departments get to have a tribunal of reviewing support departments. So a chance to kind of ask these questions. But one of the things that does come up is how much departments charge for the indirect services that they're, you know, what are they getting for it basically? Because, you know, essentially finance, HR, they do payroll, they handle their HR issues, hiring and all that. So they need to pay for those services, and it'd be the same as going out on the market, you know, basically you can't do that in government, but so, you know, shedding some light on, you know, having departments have this kind of contingency is, I think, is a great question. And for us, it kind of more has to do with just like stability of the process and not tinkering too much with the indirect service calculations, and really how indirect departments get contingencies. And we call it contingency, but really it's, you know, well, I mean, it's a contingency, but it's a department carryover, and so what's left over is through not spending all their money in the prior years. And so it's really just like they build up these funds and, you know, through underspending, because you have to underspend. So there may be a vacancy, they don't spend all their materials and services, they don't buy that extra computer, whatever it is. And then over the years, they build it up. So yeah, in a department like finance, do you really, it's a good question. Do you really need that 60,000? Often what I've seen in the past is you do come in and kind of tinker with it, sweep some of those out, or the department head may offer it up, you know, as I think Tyler has done in the past with court. And even in this budget, in the previous biennium, said, I don't need all this contingency. I don't want to charge departments more than what I need, because I can use that carryover that I've saved from prior years. And so it's a great point. We don't, our system doesn't work where we don't allow indirect service departments to not have a contingency because, well, they may have some unknowns that pop up through the year. That contract may come back more expensive, or there's a sticky HR issue that we need to go out, get outside help for. And so now we have that bottom line flexibility to hire a consultant to help us with this HR issue. So some level of contingency in each department, I think, is kind of healthy and helps managers do what they're paid to do, is manage their functions. But, you know, what is that right level? And, you know, for the last 20 minutes, we've been kind of debating on that level. So that's kind of why we do these reviews. It's a great question and great insight into this.
Did that answer it for you, Noah?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we could come up with a certain percentage of the budget, or of each department's budget for this contingency, I think that's a better road to go than just say, you know, these guessing at a large block, you know. So if there's a certain amount of budget for that department, then a certain percent, then that's what their contingency is each year. It's kind of the thought process I'm going with.
Yeah, I could see that kind of working with maybe some modifications, you know, put a cap on it or something, you know, maybe it's a percent of operations, or if they have known things that, you know, finance may be saving up. I mean, Tyler didn't mention it, but maybe they're saving up for making improvements to their front counter to better serve the public. So you build up, you know, a fund balance over the next couple of years, and then you do a, you know, small capital project like that. But maybe being more explicit on those uses and having something like, you know, a percentage of operations is a good policy.
Okay, Kathleen.
Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks to Tyler and his folks, because this budget is a huge, you know, huge complicated thing, and he's been real helpful at getting all three of us new counselors kind of up to speed on some individual tutoring for us. So that was great to help. One of the things that kind of I'm gonna put, probably kind of keep bringing up over the in the future that you've already heard me say before, but one of the platforms that I kind of ran on was kind of a concern that, first of all, that we be able to focus more of our funding on, parks, recreation, community centers, things like that, that really benefit the residents. It also benefits all the other folks that live outside the city, but that's one of my focus areas because I think it just is so important for our teens and our kids and all that. To that extent, there are a lot of services that we provide, and I'm going to be learning more about it, but as we look at the other budgets and all, my concern is that we're providing a lot of services for folks that live outside the city limits. And I think my concern here is kind of a, have we kind of looked at what it costs us to provide those services? And if we're supposed to be getting, reimbursed from the Clackamas County or something like that for whether it be Meals on Wheels or the school, the school district for our school resource officers or whatever, but I guess one of the things that I see might be necessary in finance is to kind of look at, if not all these different services, at least focus on a couple of the different services where we're providing services to folks beyond the city limits. Are we getting, reimbursed at an appropriate amount, or are we subsidizing these? Because when we're subsidizing these things, then we're kind of taking money from ourselves that can otherwise be going to these other things for our residents. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but when we do an audit and really itemize the cost for these services outside the city, whether it's the Sandy Net or whatever it is, that it's really important to be able to kind of recoup those costs. And that's that cost recovery that y'all were talking about. But I think that's a great place to start. And to some extent, I think it's doing that service audit. I don't know if that's the name of it, Tyler, service audit or something like that. There might be a name for it. I think there is, but yeah, just, and again, maybe not all the departments, but maybe, one or two of them. And so when we talk about this contingency money, and I know you've got your regular audit, budgeted in there, but I guess I would be in the future, asking us to kind of do a little bit better service audits for, one or two areas to define whether we're getting reimbursed appropriately by whatever outside agency we're doing services for outside the city limits. So
that's a great point. It's not something that's been, extensively done in the past, and many of those agreements were in place prior to my arrival in the finance director role. But that's not to say that isn't an analysis that needs to be done. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, and it's things that, it's kind of like, well, we've always done it. We've always done this. So, it's kind of maybe time to kind of say, yes, we've always done it, but again, and having that documentation is not to say we shouldn't continue to do it, but that maybe we have some good documentation to go back to these folks and say, you need to pay us more for what, we're these services that you should be paying for. So.
Yep. And I don't want to steal, Chief Roberts or Tanya Richardson's thunder with some of the examples that you provided, but we can touch on that a little bit more on those specific services in later on in the presentation when other department heads are speaking. Any other questions on finance?
Don't see any raised hands, so.
All right. Library, Sarah McIntyre.
So I'm going to start with the mission statement of the library. The Sandy and Hoodland libraries support the community in their endeavors to create lifelong readers, learn to read and write, develop the ability to find accurate information, and connect to the online world. You may notice that I said Sandy and Hoodland libraries. In 2009, after voters approved a library district with a permanent tax rate in Clackamas County, Sandy took over the management of the Hoodland Library from Clackamas County. The Hoodland Library is located in Welches. Its service population in 2021 is 5,774. Sandy's service population is 27,561. The Sandy service area starts near Boring, and the Hoodland service area ends near Government Camp. This is about 375 square miles. So Hoodland is all unincorporated population. Sandy's city population, of course, is 11,075. And so our unincorporated population that we serve as part of the Sandy service area is 16,486. So our total unincorporated population that the Sandy and Hoodland Library serves is 22,260, or almost twice the citizens in the city of Sandy. This means that in addition to the city of Sandy receiving our assessed value within our city limits for that library district permanent tax rate, we also receive a share of the unincorporated areas we serve, and that share is based on the population of those areas. So the numbers, as you can see, the library biennial budget is just over $3.4 million. About 2.9 million of that comes from intergovernmental, and that is our library district permanent tax rate. The other significant portion, 339,000, comes from the city. When the new library building was built, we needed to take out a loan of $800,000. We were short. We got grants, and the Friends of the Library fundraised, and then the Clackamas County gave us $1 million for capital improvements. But we were short money. So the city council at the time agreed to have the city cover our debt expenditures. According to the intergovernmental agreement with Clackamas County, all operating expenses can come out of district funding, but all capital expenditures need to come from other sources. I just want to make a quick note here that the Friends of Sandy Library and the Friends of Hoodland Library continue to be great supporters of library programs and special projects. You may not be able to see it in the budget clearly, but in this last biennium, the Friends of the Library fundraised over $36,000 for public computers in the Sandy Library. It was an enormous effort. And we have already been purchasing equipment and will continue to purchase more equipment as we begin the reopening process. So the goals and accomplishments. As you can see, we have an FTE of 13.33 in both Sandy and Hoodland Libraries combined. These accomplishments and goals are a sampling from our strategic plan, which started in 2017 and runs until 2022. The last goal is to assess whether to extend the strategic plan because of the pandemic or create a new plan despite not having had time to work on some of the goals. Not having people in the building, for example, not being able to help people set up email accounts and those kinds of things has made reaching some of our goals difficult. But those are some of the goals that we have reached. For example, we continued strengthening connections with the Latinx community as one of the accomplishments there. And then in the goals, kids and teens will have improved reading and writing skills. We, before the pandemic started a reading tutoring program, which was on its way to being very successful. So I look forward to reaching that goal in the future. What I'm most proud of during the pandemic, and it's not on this slide, is that Sandy and Hoodland were the first libraries in the metro area to offer curbside service, which started in April of 2020. We were also the first libraries in the metro area to offer computers by appointment, which started in September of 2020. And finally, the first libraries in the metro area to open browsing hours starting in March of 2021. So, and then the budget highlights. There in the first budget highlight is our permanent tax rate of 0.3974 cents per thousand of assessed value. The next four items are really trends that we've been seeing in our budgets over a number of budget cycles. So reduced fine revenue, we have been seeing over time, but this last year really sort of hit home. Link has not charged or collected fines since April of 2020. So our fine revenue, we're not going to reach our goal for this current budget cycle. And in the upcoming budget, I have set that fine revenue at the same level as the current budget cycle appears to be finishing. And that is really because fines are a barrier to service for disadvantaged populations. So I would love to be able to do away with fines altogether. I currently am not able to do that because I need to balance my budget. So I need that $17,000, but that is a goal for me for future. Increased personnel costs with fewer benefited FTE. I think that is very understandable. With PERS, each time I've had an employee leave, ultimately I've just farmed their hours out to other part-time employees rather than hiring another benefited person. Shifting money from physical formats to digital formats. So the digital checkouts, so these are ebooks and e-audiobooks. Just to give you an example, pre-pandemic, we were checking out about 475 items per month between the two libraries. And during the pandemic, we have been checking out 975 items per month. So it's more than doubled the checkouts. So, and as many of you know, digital items cost much more than physical items. So with physical items, we get between a 20 to 40% discount off retail price, but with digital items, they are much, much more expensive than the retail price for the general public for libraries. And then money for citywide programs. And this is really Sandy Summer Sounds. So the community center and the library have been really working together to put on a lot of the events in the community. And so this is just acknowledging that and making sure that we are prepared to help with some of those costs. And in that vein, the library and community center have started a committee to work on the 110th anniversary of Sandy. City councilors may remember this topic from the goal setting sessions. The committee includes many community organizations. We met this morning for the first time. In addition to the library and community services, we had 5 out of the 7 initial interested groups attend. We had a number of ideas generated, such as a reverse parade, which is people decorating their yards or businesses decorating outside their business. The city would set up a route. You would register on the city site, and then you could either drive or walk and see all of the parade sites. Chalk art contests. Sandy Summer Sounds will likely be part of the 110th anniversary celebration. A citywide bingo with local businesses participating, and a possible dedication of the new mural in town, including actors in costume, a singing of It's Dandy and Sandy song, and other fun events like that. So a question of the type of budget we might have for this came up with the group, and I told them I would bring this to the budget committee tonight as a request. So when you're thinking about those non-departmental funds that Jordan and Tyler were talking about earlier, think about this 110th celebration and setting aside some funds for that, hopefully. And then finally, before the pandemic began, Clackamas County held one library task force meeting. The charge of this group was to discuss and make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners regarding library services, library funding, and library governance issues. The group includes city staff, library directors, library board members, and citizen volunteers. The group met once and didn't get a chance to elect a chair for the main task force or discuss how to move forward. I do expect that within the next 6 months, this group will convene again. Once it gets going, we expect this process to last 18 months to 2 years. And that is the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Dawn? Don Hogan.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few questions. First is maybe a Tyler question, or maybe Sarah, both of you, but I need to see this information broken down by Hoodland and Sandy. So the fact that it's all rolled up makes it very difficult to understand if Sandy voters, Sandy taxpayers are getting their dollars worth, their value. So is it possible, before we let this one settle, maybe next week, to get that broken down, these same budget numbers broken down for each of the respective locations? That's part one of the question. And you can respond first if you want.
So in the last budget cycle, before the last budget cycle, actually, I did a review of the cost to run the Hoodland Library and the funds that we received for the Hoodland Library. And we actually reduced the number of hours per week based on that assessment. So I believe we are in the correct zone now, especially this last year. You know, I have spent less time going up to Hoodland, and my librarians have not been going up to Hoodland much. We weren't open for a short period, you know, for a period of time, and then the Hoodland staff has been basically working at Hoodland every day. So it probably varies a little bit per year based on those kinds of, especially this last year, for those kinds of events. But I can say that I did do an assessment of it, and we are on target with the Hoodland Library and the monies they receive and how much it costs to run.
So let me reiterate, in the interest of transparency, because we have $339,000 in general revenue coming from the city of Sandy, without that transparency, there is no way for the voters or us as budget committee members to know what we are getting with that $339,000. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
All right. Second question. These sound really negative, but unfortunately, we only give you the negatives. We love the library. We love what you're doing, but these are hard questions. Tyler, why don't we see the Friends of the Library in the budget when they have a standalone committee? See, in the school budget, we used to see outside communities, and we used to have a fund where they would come in and we could see what was coming in, and that would supplement the budget.
So that money comes in a donation and other revenue line item. It's not allocated out here. That's rolled up in one of these other groupings. And really there's not a need per se to have that going into a separate fund, because when the Friends of the Sandy Library, and Sarah, you can probably articulate this a little better than I can, when they make a donation, especially with something like the computers or the money for the computers rather, we know the intent. There's already been such a lengthy discussion, maybe even a council presentation with the computer purchase specifically. Those funds are coming right in and they're going right out oftentimes for that designated expense. Sarah, do you want to expand on that at all, or does that kind of?
I would just point out, once again, in the interest of transparency, it helps create that total financial picture of an organization. And I think it's an important part of the story that needs to be told.
Okay.
I had one more follow-up question, and then I'll shut up.
Okay.
Totally different, but it's around the city's birthday, and I appreciate the little call out. But I was surprised the library took the lead on this, and I thought as a council we would maybe have a little more discussion before we started off down that path. And so I'll just show that as my surprise.
Okay, I see Stan has a question.
Thank you, Chair. First, just wanted to say, Sarah, awesome on the reopening staff. I think that I was also proud of the library this past year. I thought you guys really were a leader in a lot of ways. My question centers around just investments in new technology. I think if anything, this last year has really shown us that people, they're starting to even turn probably faster than they were previously towards getting their information in new and different ways. I'm thinking audiobooks, My daughter Lucy, who's 10, is continually downloading things on a Kindle and reading it. My wife Mackenzie got me on the Audible on an audiobook train, and I maybe I'm just a nerd. I had a hard time finding books that had that audio component to it. And so since we're just having our community members kind of seek library services more outside of the physical library, I'm just curious kind of how we're preparing for that new kind of wave and investing in that. Thank you.
I mean, that is a good point. I mean, we have allocated, more money into the digital world than previously. But in terms of, do you mean in terms of library space versus, the physical space that the library takes up, as opposed to people, utilizing the library from outside of the building? Is that your question?
Well, sure, but I guess, I mean, I'm guessing there's certain investments we have to make in inventory for Kindle. I don't know. I don't know. But is there investments we need to make to have so many subscriptions available to our readers seeking those services, or are we just contracting out through like a third party, like the HBO, Netflix of library catalogs?
Okay.
I'm curious what that looks like and if we're investing more into it.
So we currently, the Link Libraries as a group are part of the Oregon Digital Library Consortium, which is Library to Go, Overdrive, or Libby. Those are all one bundle. And so those are all resources that we buy into that the state library offers us. So that is one source of our digital content. The other source is Cloud Library. And the Cloud Library is what the Link libraries are really putting our money into. It's where we can really control like the holds ratios, for example, so that, one item, because you have to sometimes buy multiple copies of the item because they can only be checked out at one at a time. So, if we need to have 5 copies of a book to try to fulfill a holds ratio rather than 1 copy, and then people have to wait for months and months and months. So we are putting our money basically into the Cloud Library and hoping to reach the right balance with those hold ratios. But it is difficult because those items are more expensive. And so the library district as a whole, each library puts money in. So we have a much larger collection, the ability to purchase our items in a much more efficient way. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. It seems like Mackenzie's in this endless loop of reading all the way to there's about 1 chapter left, and then her subscription's done, and then she's having to wait weeks for the next. And
yeah.
Anyways, it's just on the top of my mind. Thank you so much. Appreciate the answer.
Looks like Noah's next.
All right, couple things. I reiterate again what Dawn's saying. In the effort of transparency, I think it would help a lot to have it broken down exactly between the 2 libraries, not just in the library fund, but generally across the whole budget. My second question to you, Sarah, is I guess I don't know why the library is taking the lead of it on this 110th celebration. But you requested money. How much are you requesting?
I think somewhere around $5,000 would be enough. That money would basically be mostly for photocopy, or copies. So like if we were to do the bingo, we would need to print, 1,000 bingo sheets for citizens, for example. Or if we're going to do the reverse parade, then we would need to print maps for people to be able to walk and drive. So that the most of the cost of that would be in printing. There would be a few small costs related to supplies for events, for example, chalk for the chalk art contest, if that was decided upon, and maybe some prizes. That, you know, most prizes we get donated from local businesses, but if we needed a prize that a business couldn't donate, then that money may go towards a prize.
And sir, can you answer the question about why the library is taking the lead on this?
So the library has the largest share of staff within the city. We already do a lot of programming and events planning, so we're sort of a natural fit for it. And working in coordination with the community center, those staff have those same skills. So it's a nice mesh between, you know, the library having the staffing and ability to help the city.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen.
Hi. First of all, I just want to thank Sarah McIntyre for all her great leadership here. I mean, you know, and I hope Stan's back on, because I, you know, like Stan, am really gotten into Audible, not Audible book, because that's an Amazon thing and we don't like them. But the books on tape, or, you know, books on MP3 is what they are, and the e-reader books. Has just kept me sane through all this. And that's about all, you know, I don't really do the paper books hardly at all. So I think that is a up and coming huge increase. And like she said, they are so much more expensive because they only let you have, it's like you got to buy the book over and over again. My concern is kind of when you look at that materials and services, we're actually going down from $447,000 to $411,000 for those kind of things. So we're kind of, you know, I'm concerned that we need to, you know, either be investing more or maybe doing some fundraising. I think it would be an easy fundraiser to kind of, you know, fundraise for this electronic content and books on tape and things like that with the Friends of the Library. That would be a great thing to do. But I really want to make sure that Stan and the City Council kind of look at these numbers. If you look at the intergovernmental line for revenue, it went from like 2,700 thereabouts to 2,875. And then you look at the personnel services, and it went from 2,300 thereabouts to 2,535. And so what that means is there was, you know, the amount of money that we got from the county library district for, you know, operating these two libraries, really, you know, the personnel costs went up by $234,000, and yet we only got $179,500 in increased revenue from the district. So right there, that's like almost $55,000 that the city is then having to subsidize. So it is really critical. They talked at the last library board meeting about how, you know, there's just kind of this malaise about getting this library district group, you know, the Clackamas County Library Consortium, is that the word, together to kind of re-look at this, because I did kind of get online and do a bunch of research after my first library meeting and found out about how the formulas, you know, how the sausage was made and how the formula allocations happened and all. And a lot of it was based on assumptions from 2010, 12, 13, you know, what our census was back then, what our how much money we had, our populations and things like that. It is badly in need of an update. And we, again, you know, if we're going to run the library for these two districts, which is critical services, we need to make sure that we're getting the funds to do that. Or we need to, you know, I don't know what the or else, but we can't continue to be subsidizing these services. So the one thing I will say is it would be really helpful for Stan and all of us to have some really good lessons on how to get the ebooks, because I get my stuff off of that Oregon Digital Library Consortium and Multnomah County Library, but I'm interested in that cloud one you mentioned, but having kind of some help on that. Y'all were shut down, so there wasn't a lot of help available, but I think it would help everybody to have that. The last thing I would say is that, you know, this question about these other things, the library folks do just, you know, Katie Brown has been doing the music in the park for, you know, years. And so a lot of these employees do these cool and groovy things that we all love to attend, and they do it because they love it. And I think that we need to kind of continue doing these kind of things. What I will say though, is that truly those are community services that should be in that community services budget. And I realize that we have the employees in the library doing that, but I think it kind of, you know, I think those are things that we all want to continue to do, and we need to be making sure that we're recognizing that those are a community service expense for rec events or whatever you want to call it, community service event, and funding it there. And if it means, you know, funding a little bit of the FTEs out of the library, because like you said, they have the FTEs available, whereas the rec department is much smaller. Somehow I think it's, you know, again, with that transparency, and the library advisory board had some questions like, you know, why are we doing that? That's not a library thing, you know, and why, and who's paying for that? They kind of, you know, so they're asking some good questions, and you all are asking good questions, and having that kind of, you know, when we're doing community services stuff, that should be going into the community services budget, and you can figure out, you know, how to cover the FTEs wherever they need to be. But, you know, it's kind of, work as planned, or planned, you know, plan the work and then work as planned kind of thing. So they're doing a great job, and I am concerned that I want to, you know, I would like to see that 411. I'm concerned that's too low. You know, maybe that's some grants, maybe it's some fundraising. And then again, I think I really want to see Stan and the city council push the county commissioners to reopen this Clackamas County Consortium group to relook at the funding allocations, because we can't continue to subsidize, you know, if they're only giving, you know, us $179,000 more dollars and the personnel stuff's going up 234. We can't be covering that, and we shouldn't. So thanks.
Carl.
Yeah, in terms of, I'll take the ones just happened here. I think you're right on, Kathleen and Noah, about this materials, and I think that we need to at least stay even. The 447 to the 411, I think it should stay the 447. I think that's really crucial, because we are doing a lot of things that are more expensive now, especially with the digital. And I am also a digital guy finally, and it takes me a lot of effort to figure out how to get to that Go library. Every time I go in there, all the good ones are taken. So maybe there's a way to get more. Secondly, I think the library is our frontline people for these kinds of events. And one of the things that about just for example, the 110-year celebration, I'm not sure how it got into the library, but I was sitting in my office this afternoon, and I got two people came in and said, Carl, you got to know, things are really going great on the 110-year celebration, and the library has taken the lead on it. And I thought, wow, I was hoping to catch it up with a virtual meeting, and I missed it because I had some client issues. But I really am pleased that Sarah's taken on 110. Again, Kathleen, you're right on. I think that if it is a community services project, we should fund it out of community services. I'm not so sure that the library shouldn't do those things that they've been doing quite a long time now, because they do them so well. Our library is the place where people go to do some of these things, the chalk art, the celebrations, the reading programs, all those things draw people to our community. And we just don't have enough community events with the coronavirus to shake a stick at right now, and to have the library be kind of that front line, because they have the building, because they have the place where people go to. I'm really an advocate for the library. So Sarah, $120,000, $130,000, whatever it is that you expect to get for compliments. This is really the best thing I've seen in the community. One last thing, and I'm going to do my own advice, is I think as a committee members, we should keep our questions succinct. We got a lot of departments to look at, and being able to ask questions is important, but we should probably keep them succinct to the questions. So good job. Thanks for listening.
I see one more hand, and then that's it. No more hands, because we got to do a reality check here. We're not through the general fund yet, and we're after, it's 8:20, and we're supposed to go till 9. I think you can pretty much pencil in that May 10th date if it continues. But Jeremy, you go ahead.
Sorry, I was just shocked. Carl, I'll be quick. Carl said he was a digital guy, and I about fell on my chair. Sorry, Carl. But anyways, one of the things about the 110-year celebration, I know it came up to being something in the council goals for that. I had always figured that you know, I know the library has done these programs in the past, and I wasn't surprised that the library would have taken charge on that. But making sure that it was funded would have come out of the, for the library, or whoever was going to put that on, was coming out of that 300 and whatever excess money that we had to distribute out from that piece, and not from their inside their budget alone. Anyways, just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, I wanted to say one thing about the library, in that, as Sarah said, the city population is a little over 11,000. The district is, the city is basically 1/3 of the district. 2/3 is the county, and the funding from the county should reflect that. So I'm concurring with Kathleen and Carl and all the people that said we need to make sure the county is paying their fair share. But we need to move on to the next item under the general fund. And as I noted before to Tyler and Jordan, reality check, we're sitting here at 8 o'clock, 8:30. I don't have my watch or phone handy, but before the questions for the library started, we were at like 8:10. So I'm not sure we're going to get through everything on the agenda tonight unless we go beyond the 9 o'clock by some. But I do appreciate all the great questions. And if you follow Carl's succinct recommendation, that would be great. We'll move on now to the police, which I'm sure will be a really short budget, easy to get through. Tyler.
I'll just turn it over to Chief Roberts.
Okay.
Good evening, folks. I'm Ernie Roberts. I'm the Chief of Police here in the city of Sandy. I've had the honor of in this position for several years now. Tyler, if you can just real quickly, I'm going to go through a few things. Can you go to the next slide? Just real quick. We'll go back, but we'll go. I wanted to do a little bit different order so we can get through. I'm trying to speed this portion up for you guys to, because I'm sure there'll be questions. I'm not going to just read our mission statement because I'm sure you've seen that. But I'll go into some of the accomplishments. The public safety fee was a topic of some conversation before we were able to get that implemented and hire 2 additional officers. And those folks are just recently got released to solo status, which and then in law enforcement terms, that means they're able to work on their own. So, and that takes quite a bit of time to accomplish that. So, and they're doing very well. They're doing some really good things here. So that's Officer Hala Ling and Officer Michael Boyes, who were hired as a result of that public safety fee. During this last biennium, we did get our reaccreditation award, which is from the Oregon Accreditation Alliance. And that is, we've been a fully accredited agency for some time now. And in fact, one of the few, there's not all agencies in the state of Oregon are fully accredited. There is kind of a trend of folks heading that way, but we did it some time ago. It requires a lot of administrative work, and my lieutenant Sean Lundry is our accreditation manager, and he does a lot of the back end work for this, and it requires audits and things of that nature, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. So I wanted to thank him during this meeting because he just really does a lot of work to make sure that we are still getting that, or making sure that we're fully in compliance with that. And we did receive that award this last budget cycle, and that is posted proudly in our police department building there. So during this last budget cycle, as every other department experienced, we had some difficulties navigating through this pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic. And for the police department, things got busier, and not as obviously officers and most of my staff don't have the ability to work from home. It's just the nature of the work that we do. And so as a result of this, we actually got busier, especially during the wildfires, the wildfire event that we had. We implemented a mandatory 12-hour schedule, which had obvious effects on our overtime budget. But those things were needed to make sure that we were getting timely information out to the folks that live in our community and make sure everyone was safe. So that was an event that really really kind of tested our resolve, so to speak, as did everyone's. Everybody was really on edge during that. And I think that the way that our community, together with all of our city departments, came together and worked together on that was just really something pretty fantastic. So I commend all the departments for helping out in one way or another, because they did. We have some goals in the next biennium, and that's just to continue carrying out our important mission that we have at our police department. We are in the middle of a recruitment process to fill some positions that have been open. If you kind of look at the total FTEs here, I wanted to just make quick note that it looks like if you look at the total FTEs, it kind of looks the same. But within the, especially within the 1921, that really seesawed, for lack of a better term. We had some folks, we had retire, we had a couple go to different agencies, and then one that that was let go. So trying to fill those positions is really was a challenge. We updated our recruitment process and have did our best to get the best possible candidates, but it's been a challenge during this day and age to hire police officers. I think everybody has kind of seen that. So, but we are headed in the right direction. We have two that are going to, one that just started today, in fact, and one other one that will start on May 10th, and they will come before you, I think, on May 17th to get sworn in. And then we have chief's interviews set up for the near future to fill that final spot. So it's our, we really would like to get all these positions filled so we don't have to recruit anymore in this next biennium. So, and also we have been exploring options for some new technology for the police department. This is mostly includes the body cameras for our police officers, which is in this current environment has been a topic of conversation for many agencies in our state and around the nation. A lot of agencies are already going to these, and we have been studying this for quite some time. It's a cost that is not in our budget but we have been exploring that and have been getting some quotes, and also outfitting the rest of our patrol vehicles with in-car video systems. At the current time, only half of them have those systems in there, which include audio. Tyler, you can go ahead and go to the back, please, to the other. So yeah, you can see here that there's not the change in the total. If you look at the total, the change is I believe 569,000 from the last of this, and some change. I mean, those are big numbers, but a lot of that change is PERS, insurance, salary, and benefits costs that eat up most of that, as Tyler will attest to. The PERS is just wow, really impacted not just the police department, but all of our departments. It's a huge cost, and scrambling to find the money to contribute to that, it's been challenging, to say the least. And there's a number of line items in here. In our department, it's the biggest budget with the most folks, full-time staff. So I'm sure there's questions. So you can see the numbers. I'd like to open it up and just let people ask what they need to ask, and I'll try to explain. I might refer to Tyler, or even the city manager here and there on some of those questions. I don't know, but I'd like to open it up and just hear what people have to say.
I had one question for you, Chief, before we go to the number of raised hands. Since there is a desire on your part, or you've been studying the idea of having cameras, body cams, and then make sure at the very least we have cameras in all of our patrol vehicles, I would suggest coming up with some figures that you can present to the council on both of those line items as possible use of some funds that we have coming forth in the near future, that you may be able to access for those, I think, very important expenditures.
Yeah.
I would call on Stan now to ask a question.
Just Chair Malone, if I just real quick before Mayor Pulliam, I do have those figures, of course I do. I can get those figures to all of you for quotes that we've got currently that are current within the last couple months. So we've worked with those vendors, and so we do. I do have those figures and exact figures. So
Appreciate that.
Well, past mayors and current mayors think alike. Linda, you stole my question. So that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Jan Lee.
Yes, I had that question also, but the other question I have that goes along with that is, with the 10 new policing bills before the legislature, I know, Chief, that you follow through the association what's going on with that. And I'm wondering if you see anything that's going to put our budget at risk with the new items. And I would join the others in saying, if we have extra money, this will be a good place to spend it on the cameras and the technology for the police cars.
Jan, this is we're waiting with, for lack of a better term, with bated breath on some of these items that are going through right now. So some of those have been, we've been involved, of course, with our Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police has been involved in this legislation from the start. There's many meetings, and they've been very gracious with us and letting us have our say on some of these bills and measures that are coming through. In short, unfortunately, and the biggest thing is there's just really no way to tell right now until some of these bills, if they do get passed, such as I'm sure you're aware of all of those. Some of them can have could have an impact on our budget. For example, there's a measure that would require some different types of uniforms and posting on vehicles and things of that nature. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but having to redo all those things would be a big cost for an agency our size. So it's just things like that we're waiting on, training requirements and things of that nature that we're heavily involved in and trying to give our input. And they've been very good with us, like I said, about listening to what we have to say. And some of it has had an impact on some of these measures that from a police perspective, I'm not saying from everybody in the community, everybody has their different opinion on some of these, but some of those for us were a little bit written a little bit poorly and should have been thought out. It was our opinion that maybe a little bit more thought should have been put into some of those. That's all I'd wanted to say about that. But yes, and with those items that I mentioned, the cameras, that's all about transparency for our department. We want to be fully transparent, and that's just another tool for us to. And frankly, if you ask my officers, they want them. They will tell you, yes, we want them, because when something does occur, it's a way to show the public this is exactly what happened and this is the footage. So it is a really valuable tool for us. It does come with an expense, but it is, in my perspective, it's worth the dollars.
Noah.
Good evening, Chief Roberts. First, I just want to give my heartfelt thank you and gratitude to you and your team for all the hard work that you do.
Thank you.
Looking at the budget, I saw that police trainings is about $17,000 a year. And in addition to the body cameras, which I agree are needed, if there was police training that you saw a need for and an increased budget for, what would those trainings be and how much?
Well, the line item you're looking at is the $17,000 in training and professional advancement. That includes, just before I get started on the other, Noah, and thank you for the question. That includes all different types of training for my officers, and also includes state mandated training. We have to have a certain number of hours to keep our certifications, whether it be a patrol officer has different requirements than, say, a supervisory position such as a sergeant or a lieutenant, or myself as a chief. We have different requirements in hours that we have to, so that includes that. Some of the other trainings that we are looking into that I sadly have to say that we haven't done much of in the past are a lot of that involve a lot of officer wellness types of trainings. In the past, it's my own personal opinion that some of this has been neglected, that some of these items that we need to be looking into. We do have a new wellness policy, and we have some upcoming training in May of this year. So it's not in this budget cycle, but Tyler could tell you, because I got a call from him when I put in for that. He was like, what is, why are you spending this money on this? But he had known about it, but we had to delay it because of COVID. We were supposed to actually do it last year. And that training is actually all about officer wellness, and we have a nationally recognized person coming out to talk to our officers about the daily impact of our job and how to mentally prepare themselves and things of that nature. So they're better prepared in the long run. And we do want to do more of that type of training. Sad to say, in the law enforcement community, I think that's been neglected in the past. And as a result of that is, it could be a number of issues, but I do feel like this suicide rate for police officers is out of control. And I think there's things that we can do about it to get that number down. And those are the things that we have to do. We have to take care of our folks. And the city of Sandy has always been, in my opinion, very good about this, about taking care of their people. I've said this to folks before. It's the best place that I've ever worked, and I've worked for a few different agencies. So just taking care of our people, that's some of the additional training that we want to, and that does cost money, of course. Now, this $17,000 doesn't include a lot of that, but it does include some. Some of those trainings are a little expensive. Most of the time it requires those folks to come out here, and it's paying for their time and things like that, and lodging and stuff like that. So it is expensive, but much needed.
I guess to follow up on it, if there's a way that you could create a wish list of trainings and the expenditures for those, because I believe some of this 308,000 needs to go to you guys, take care of you and your officers, but also some additional training that I think would be helpful. And so if there's a way, just like a wish list of training that we could get from you at some point, that'd be helpful.
Of course, fortunately around, in this day and age and around our country, there's no shortage of folks that offer all types of really great training that we haven't had yet at our department. So I can definitely compile a list of things that I would like to see my folks get. That's not a problem. I can do that for you.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Rich.
Good evening, Chief Roberts. Hey, I'll start out by saying I want to agree with Noah about the training a little bit. I have two questions, though. The first one is, when I look at the allocated costs for vehicles, there's a very large expenditure back in, I think it was 2015 budget, and then there's very little, there's none this year. And so how does the vehicle, I know it's a significant cost, so how does that work? Are we having to come up with large amounts every so often, or are we actually budgeting for a vehicle that's obviously going to depreciate as well as deteriorate? And then my second question is, I'll just throw them both out there. I'm looking at the 17 to 19 and 19 to 21 budget, and I see one year is a little over 96,000. The next year is $75,000 in grants, but I'm not seeing any grant funding coming in this year. Can you explain a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, of course. Councilor Sheldon, thank you for the questions. I'll start off with the vehicles question. Now, that very large expenditure that you saw back then was, it had been, this is a prior administration, and they worked with the dollars that they had. I'm not saying that the things that were done that were wrong, but we had an aging fleet that had to be completely redone. That large expenditure was the purchase of a large amount of vehicles, and actually those were 2014s, which we purchased at the time. And that wasn't done on, and Tyler can probably explain a little bit better on how that was actually a a government type of a loan that we did, and we got a very low interest rate, and we're able to get a certain amount of vehicles for that. That's that cost you see there. Those vehicles have been paid off. So we do own those vehicles, but we still have the 2014s. Originally, this budget cycle, I needed those 2014s replaced because they're getting up around 100,000 miles, and the cost to maintain them is getting higher and higher and higher as expected. I had, and I'll have Tyler jump in just a second here, but I had we had 6 of those, and I needed all those replaced. I had placed those in here, and that did not budget out. We couldn't balance. So I believe I still had 3 in there. Tyler, can you jump in for?
Yeah, so, excuse me. The vehicles that we currently have through Enterprise are leased vehicles. And so we essentially record the value of that lease as loan proceeds, not loan process, as it says on here. We'll get that typo corrected. And then the value of those vehicles are identified in capital outlay. At this point in time, there is no new vehicles budgeted in this department. There would be replacing the existing Enterprise fleet, which I believe Chief said was 6 vehicles, because the lease will be up during this biennium. So we will need to make a determination as to how to move forward with those vehicles, whether purchase them or turn them over and release some new vehicles. But to get sort of everything to balance out and to present a balanced budget, there's no new vehicles, no body cameras, no dash cameras in the budget as you see it tonight.
Really high expenses. When is that going to come before us?
Likely part of the conversation we have with the 308,000. We'll get an email sent out to answer some of those questions that are coming up tonight with either expenditures for body cameras or library questions, things like that. We'll make sure we get information out to you before the end of the week.
And that's why I'm asking that question. The equipment that you just listed there is 308,000 easy. And so I'm just curious why we're not coming up with more of a rotation so that we budget in allocated costs each year, but we have a rotation so that our equipment stays mission ready and that they can be effective, but also not having to come up with these huge dollar costs every other couple of years, every 4 or 5 years.
That's how it used to be. They used to rotate 2 cars every,
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I don't want to beat that up too much. I think it sounds like we can have that discussion more later on.
Yeah.
But the other question I have is about the grants, Chief. Can you answer that one?
I can answer that one just real quickly. It wouldn't be that cost that Tyler was talking about. For example, in a biennium, for example, 3 of those in this biennium would be $66,000. That would be the cost of the lease. So it's not like you're with the Enterprise program, and it's 66,000, right around that. I don't have the exact figure, but that would be it's 11,000 and change per vehicle per year. So you're talking about for those vehicles, for 3 of them, it would be $66,000 or so, right around there for 3 vehicles in this budget cycle for that lease requirement. So it's not like you're doing the 300,000 would be because we're not buying them outright. It's on this lease program. And then, and Chair Malone, you're right. The idea when we started this with Enterprise was to rotate those so we don't run into this problem. The problem that we just have is dollars. To your question about Councilor Sheldon about the grants, that money that you're seeing there was that we had a COPS grant for an officer. And Tyler might be able to reiterate the year exactly because I don't remember, but that cycle is done during this last budget cycle. So that's why you're not seeing the grant money. That was from the COPS program, and that cycle has we've already drawn down all the funds and also paid what our obligations were to the federal government. So that cycle's done. That's why you see the zeros on there.
Yeah, that was a $125,000 grant. The officer was hired in October of 2017. We had to retain them and have retained them for 3 years to get the full value of that grant. And then, yeah, we just haven't identified any other grant funding at this point in time for that department.
Okay, I believe the next one up is Kathleen.
Chief Roberts, thanks for that great overview. One of the questions I had kind of tears off of what Rich was saying about grants, and I guess, you know, I kind of support the idea of cameras and training that was brought up by a couple other folks, but I'm also wondering, we've got all this federal money available to us coming down the pike, and what is, you know, and the whole focus of having more cops with, you know, body cameras and all that seems to be a real important national discussion here. So I'm just wondering if there's, you know, when we talk about those important needs, whether or not we could, you know, please try to dial for dollars and get grants to cover those important needs. So my first question.
Yeah, and to answer that, we do have some folks working on grants for equipment of that, like right now, and that, you know, the process. I've heard you, Councilor Walker, you're very knowledgeable about the grant process. So we do have some, for example, we were able to get some grants some time ago for some body armor things that our folks wear. This was some time ago, and we're working on more of that now, but that does take time. And of course, it's not in the budget when we don't have those dollars.
Yeah.
I do agree, though, that there are opportunities with you, Councilor Rocker. There are.
Yeah. And actually, Nancy Anamnit's a much better grant writer than I am. And she's always willing to review grant documents for people. So some of the confusion I have is because it seems like we're always, you know, now we're hiring 3 new cops, and then we had those other 2 new ones that I've met, and they seem very nice and very capable. So I'm just kind of confused about how many cops did we have, not including the code enforcement guy? How many cops did we have before the Estacada contract, and how many cops do we have now? And I'm just saying cops, not the support staff.
I'm sorry. Did somebody else say something there?
Nope.
Yeah, you can. If you look at the numbers, Councilor Walker, before the total FTEs, it's only going to amount to, in the 19.88, I'm going to have Deputy City Manager teams weigh in on that. But we're essentially looking at between now and then, and I would have to go back and get you the numbers, Councilor Walker, and I will do that. I can email you those if you would like. Dive back into that exactly when we had the Estacada contract, but offhand, I believe we have 1 more now.
Yeah.
Between
Okay.
now and then.
What's that?
Between then and now, sorry.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I would have to go back and look to get you the exact numbers on sworn staff.
Yeah. And that was just my question. It just seems like, you know, I keep hearing, oh, you know, we're hiring new people and stuff. And so I guess I just don't understand. I guess I just, you know, are they replacing existing? Are people leaving and we're replacing?
Yeah, there are. There are, as I had mentioned before, Councilor Walker, there was, unfortunately, I had a couple go to other agencies and a couple retirements as well. And then one that
understood. Okay, and then probably, this isn't going to be a new question for you, but my question has to do, and this is kind of, at the beginning of this whole meeting, we heard about how, you know, some of the departments that are using general fund monies needs to do a better job of cost recovery, the rec program, the parks programs, blah, blah, woof, woof. And, you know, I like hearing that, but, you know, it's got to apply to all the general fund things. And so when we have an opportunity to recover more funds in all the departments, I think we should. And so with that statement, my concern is that we are supplying 2 Oregon Trail School District resource officers at the cost of less than $48,000 a year for a 3/4 of the year resource officer. One of them is going obviously probably to Sandy High School, and the other one's going out to, you know, some of the, up to Welch's, to Boring. And again, that's where I feel like that second resource officer could probably be and should be paid, or, you know, done through Clackamas County, since they're spending most of their time outside the city. But even if they're not, $48,000 per officer, when we're obviously, you know, that the cost of providing that service is far more than that. I would say it's at least double that when you consider the salary, the rigs, the bullets, the PERS, the whole 9 yards, training and all. I just feel like we are subsidizing the school district to a huge amount. And I think we need to be charging them closer, if not all of it, what it's costing us, truly costing it, but at least some of it, at least more than that. And I'm just, I'm going to keep hammering that drum, because that's coming at the expense of, with how much we're paying for police, that's the biggest chunk of money we spend in this city. And I just think that, it's well worth every dollar we spend. It's very important, but that would even, when we're talking about putting more money into the police, when we're giving it away to this other area and they're spending time outside the city, it's just a real concern to me that we, again, do that cost recovery for all the departments. And here's a huge chunk that we could really get some money back, either, if not to your department, then to, the recreation program, parks, or something like that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Walker. Before I talk about that a little bit, before our presentation tonight, I was, Tyler and I were having a little bit of some discussions about how much that fund was actually. So I want to refer to him if we had an update on the exact number, Tyler, or no?
Yeah, I don't have it costed out to an exact number, but just to, talk ballpark figures here for a moment. The annual salary with benefits and PERS for a middle of the road officer, someone that's been here for 3 or 4 years, is about $120,000 per year with all those benefits included. And so we are not, we're not recovering probably, we're not recovering 50% of the salary. Chief Roberts, you can maybe talk a little bit more about the actual time spent providing the SRO functions versus other officer functions outside of that role. I know during spring break and summer break and other holidays, they're utilized in other capacities, but I'm not sure if you want to talk about that at all.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, I think that and Councilor Walker, you and I had some discussion about this during the last budget cycle, and thank you very much for those questions. They're certainly good questions. I think at that time I had mentioned I had some discussions with superintendent of the Oregon Trail School District, and we meet regularly. Where at that before they were paying less than that, and it was my for lack of a better term, goal to kind of have them at least get to that 50% level. And if I'm right, Tyler, I think it's an increase of 3% a year. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's per or?
Yes.
No. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and my goal was to get to 50%. So, and that's where we are now. I haven't had any discussions with Superintendent Bear as of lately, Councilor Walker, to increase that, just to be, perfectly out there. I haven't discussed that with him, though we did have that agreement from before. I am certainly willing, if it's the council's direction or a city manager's direction that they decide they want that to increase, I certainly am willing to have that discussion. I have a very good relationship with the school district. I would, for my own, I would just say that for that money, I feel like, well, let me just outline the services that we provide real quick, and I'll try to do this quickly. I know that we're running short on time. So we have two, we originally had one and the school district wanted another, and for safety reasons. And we've always taken care of all the schools in the school district instead of just the ones that are in the city limits of Sandy. And the reason we done that was for we had a mission with them that we wanted to create the safest schools possible. And we've been able, I think, in my opinion, to do that. We've done things with our programs with the Oregon Trail School District that other agencies have not done. In fact, we've been asked to speak at nationally on this subject, and did so a couple of years back about things that we were able to implement with the schools. We train all the teachers every year, including incoming and reoccurring training for staff that have been there in the Run, Hide, Fight program. We do that annually for every teacher in the school district, and that is for active shooter types of situations. And we feel like it is our duty to, to provide the safety of not just the schools, but the whole school district. And when you start splitting them up and have other agencies doing, who often have, and I'm not saying they're better or worse, but they have different protocols than we do. And the school district and the superintendent wanted the whole school district to be on the same page in regard to safety. And I agree with them in that regard. So the other issue is that we, for example, during this COVID pandemic, everybody knows, unfortunately, and that the schools were not, the folks were not able to go to schools in person. So those officers during this whole last school year we were using for patrol functions. Thankfully, it was kind of almost, for lack of a better term, a godsend, because we had lost folks and we had holes to fill on patrol, and we used our SROs in that capacity. And just so that everybody knows that I never got a call from the Oregon Trail School District wanting some of that, because the officers weren't there. I never got a call from them saying, hey, we should pay less. So I thought that was very good of them, and it was never even discussed. So Councilor Walker, I'm certainly willing, if this is a council and the budget committee's decision for me to explore that, I certainly will. But I believe now it's fair and it's part of our mission. And but like I said, I'm willing to look at some other options if it's your will to do so.
Yeah, this has never been about what a great job you guys do. Those are awesome services you provide. You do a great job. It does make sense to have, the same agency doing that. I'll give you that. It's just about, a financial thing, that what we have to give up, when we're just the cost of the cop is $120,000, not to mention, the vehicle and your time and all that other stuff. It's quite a bit more. It's a huge subsidy that we're giving. And I just feel like, we need to recoup those dollars. And we just, it's too important to, to the rest of our police department and to our other programs. But it's never been about what a great job and how important that work is that you all do. And I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Walker.
Jeremy.
Yeah, I just had a couple things. And on the speaking about the school district there, I do support that we do that function. You do a great job. I think it was explained before how the students come back to our high school, or they move from one elementary up, and so they can follow the kids and help those kids out. And we are the center of this whole region, our school districts area, and they are part of our community, especially those kids as well. And so I think there's huge advantages as life goes on after they've come up to our high schools, as well as come out as citizens, that we can be helping them in that. So I'm all for what we're doing there with the students. The couple questions I have, though, as I look at this, is your gas fuel bill. And it feels like a little nickel and diming here, but it's gone down. So is that because you got more fuel efficient vehicles? Because I know you have more police officers. So you went to 60,000 versus the 75 or 83 before. And so that was the one question. The other one was under computer equipment. You have 0 for this Biennium, as well as, then the last question I had was the 800 megahertz radio. And I bring that one up, Chief, because for the last, decade, Rich would probably know some of this too, is we've been talking about the new radio systems that we need to be upgrading. I know we did do some upgrading, but they're constantly having us change that out. Maybe we're all done and complete with that, but in the past we've had to shore up that or put in special money to get that working. So anyways, just wanted to ask about those, as I don't see the funds in that line item.
Okay. Sorry, I had to plug in my computer. My battery was running low. Usually it lasts for about 3 hours, and we're going a little long, so sorry about that. So let me, Councilor Peatzold, just to start off, I think you had a question about the fuel first. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, and some of these numbers are a little bit different. Tyler, I may need to call on you for some of this because we had some differences in some of these during the budget cycle. But so you see $60,000 as opposed to 75. Now it's a little bit both, Councilor Peatzold, is our newer vehicles are more fuel efficient. And then we didn't use as much as the last budget cycle as I had put in. So fuel is really a hard one to manage because the prices can go. It's really a hard one to predict, and I don't want to go too low, but with what was spent last time and the more fuel efficient vehicles that we'd had for the most part of the fleet, and excluding the 2014s, which aren't being used as much as the new ones, I came up with that figure. So it's a combination of, it's a little bit of both of those. Now, if the fuel prices skyrocket, of course, things might change, but it's just so unpredictable that the fuel cost is a really hard one for the police department. We do get help from Enterprise on that. We have averages per each vehicle and things like that I do use to calculate that. But honestly, it's not an exact science. For lack of there's some guessing there. So, and your next one was what, Counselor? I'm sorry, I was plugging in my computer.
Yeah, no, that's okay. The computer line item and computer stuff was 0. And we try to keep rotating that stuff out so you don't get caught. I just see that 0 for the next 2 years. And then also the 800 megahertz radio systems that we've been working on so hard to get up to speed. Are we done upgrading those systems? It seems like they're always, we're always having to fill that hole for that system there.
Okay, the 800 megahertz radio system is, Tyler, I had talked to you about that. You had moved that portion.
I can jump in here. So there was about $44,000 budgeted in the 800 megahertz radio system. That was moved to contractual services because we're really paying sort of an annual organizational fee or contract fee rather to Clackamas County for the radio service. So we moved it out of the capital expenditure line item into a material and services line item to better accurately reflect, or more accurately reflect, what the actual payment is being used for. So the radio system's not going anywhere. It's still in place, still functioning, just reclassified where the expense is coded to.
Okay, so no longer buying it anymore. We have it. We're just doing the service part of it.
Yep.
Okay.
And
don't need to buy anymore. Okay.
And similar response for the computer equipment in that we have had a bad habit in the past of coding non-capitalized expenses to a capital account. Not every computer is a capital expense. $1,000 for a new laptop really is sort of just an operational material and service that you need. And so we're trying to clean up, and you'll see this throughout future departments presentations as well, trying to clean up what's actually getting coded to capital outlay and have that truly be capital expenditures, not miscellaneous other little items. And so there may have been some adjustments. Instead of $4,000 in computer equipment, we maybe added that to either supplies or some other more relevant line item to capture the non-capital cost.
Thank you.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The Councilor Peatzold, just real quickly, so that, and some of that other cost in it that you see that was more that we don't have now is, and Councilor Sheldon is really familiar with this, is the new 800 megahertz radio system that we're supposed to be going on to the whole system later on this year. So, and that cost has already been paid. So, hopefully it works good. So we'll see.
We have 2 more questions for you, Chief. First from Mayor Pulliam.
Yes, Mayor.
Hey, Chief. Great report tonight. Thank you for that. So I want to reiterate Jeremy's position. I'm all about the school resource officer program. If anything, I'd like to see us have more of them. That said, though, and to Councilor Walker's point, I want to have the best agreement possible, right, when we're doing this. So a couple follow-ups I had kind of on that back and forth. Now, you were talking about the 50% of the officer, but my understanding is that 50% is based on a starting salary wage for an officer just new to the force, but the officer actually in that position is not new to the force. So we're paying more than 50% of the freight for that officer as a result of that, aren't we?
Yeah, and Tyler had mentioned earlier too, Mayor Polium, that we had based that on a step. What step was that, Tyler? Right in the middle, 3 or 4?
Yeah, mid-range is about 120, so a step 3 or step 4 would be kind of the parameters there. We also typically in our budget for positions or for a scenario like this where we don't know who the employee will be, we tend to budget high, so full family, even though it might only be employee only or employee spouse on insurance coverage. And so that gives us, sort of maybe an inflated cost, but when we're trying to back into a reimbursement amount, we want to make sure we're not cutting ourselves too short. At least that's the methodology that I tend to try to use.
I guess my question then is why are we negotiating based on a starting salary instead of like a medium range salary for a typical officer, or based on the actual position that we end up filling in some kind of joint hiring decision?
Yeah, well, I think we did we didn't do it on a starting salary on step 1. We based that on a step in the middle of, there's 7 steps, Tyler, now for patrol.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
7 steps, and it was either step 3 or step 4 that we based it on, not step 1.
Oh, okay, and then as the officer gets cost of living adjustment increases and stuff, where is that in the agreement?
It's not in there.
So we cover those each year, the additional cost for the officer?
Yeah, it's changing, and the increases per year for the school district at 3% is kind of how we had figured that. But and like I'd said to Councilor Walker, Mayor, that I would agree that it's not perfect, but I thought it was fair. But I am obviously willing to take direction if that's needed.
Yeah, I'll close out. I don't want to take too much time, but I just would reiterate strong position for school resource officers. God forbid we have some kind of violent shooting or something in this community. I don't think any of us will regret a financial decision to cover the officer. I do believe in fair and equitable, agreements. And I do think that there's probably some work to do in that regard with the agreement that we come to place with the school district. So I'm always for revisiting some of those things. Just some of my thoughts on that. Thank you so much, Chief. You're doing an outstanding job along with your force.
Thank you, Mayor, very much.
Don Hokinson.
Hey, Chief, maybe Mayor can correct me if I'm out of line, but when you're meeting with Aaron, I would love to be involved in those conversations as the liaison from the council to the school board. It'd be nice to know what's happening in those discussions.
Yeah, I have Councilor Hokinson, I have usually, and this hasn't been the same during the pandemic, but usually I meet monthly with Superintendent Bear, and those conversations cover a gamut of things from, hey, how my officers are doing to, for example, the last discussion was we have a security audit that's due to be completed for at the beginning of the next school year. So we'll need to work on that. So those are types of the things that we discussed, but I can certainly fill you in on some of those things.
So the operational and tactical things, I don't think I have an interest in, but when we talk about the relationship, the budgets, and I think we just missed their budget cycle, which is going to put us out of sorts for another 2 years as we try to address this.
Okay. Before we move on, I just want to say, Tyler and Jordan, when you're looking at, I don't know when the parameters come down from the feds on how we can use those ARP, the ARPA funds or whatever, it seems like, especially, it'll probably happen within each of the budgets, but it seems crystal clear within the police budget that there were needs and requirements that would be seen as necessary things, but because of the bottom line total requirement that you're budgeting to, we left things out of the police budget because we didn't have enough money for them. But it'd be like in your family budget saying, we don't have enough money for insurance, we're just not going to get it. You got to find a way somewhere to meet the needs of that we actually have within the police department, the body cams, the police car cams, the stuff that's a necessity, not just a wish list of fun things that we could do. That also includes the training. But maybe it's one of the few budgets that might have COVID relatable capital outlays that could be put towards, rather than, it seems like we spent that 300,000 or 307,000 like 10 times now. But this is something that could actually maybe qualify for that 2.3 million. Parts of it could qualify for the 2.3 million, which is a bigger pot, and other departments would not qualify for it. So I would urge you to look at the possibility of some of the needs, not wants, but some of the needs of the police department coming out of that federal fund from the CARES Act. And then also I want to, and I have to make apologies to Andy and Tanya, because you sat through 3 hours of meetings, and we are now at about 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, and your budgets are still to come, but I need to get a sense of the budget committee and everybody in this meeting. Are those the only 2 budgets left, Tyler, or do we have several?
We have several. So to complete the general fund, we would be looking at Kelly O'Neill presenting planning and building. We would be looking at Tanya Richardson presenting recreation and senior services. Jordan presenting on economic development, Greg Brewster presenting on IT, and myself presenting on non-departmental. That would close out the general fund, and then we could push the other funds to a future meeting.
Do you have a estimate, notwithstanding questions, of what those additional general fund budgets would take in a time estimate?
Notwithstanding questions, we can probably do the department overview and delivery of each one, in 5 minutes apiece.
Chair, I'm telling you, based on experience with these folks, it ain't going to be 5 minutes each, including me. We're talkers.
There's no way. There's absolutely.
I don't want to give short shrift to anybody either. I don't want to rush through the last 5 because they happen to fall at the end of the meeting.
Agreed.
And not get full bore. But yet again, I don't want to have us go till 11 o'clock at night. Carl.
I move that we go
3 hours to get through 4 budgets. So yeah. There's just no way.
To be clear, I was just indicating 5 minutes for the presentation, not, obviously there'd be more time for questions after that.
I move that we go until 9:30, get what we can done, and then the rest of them are going to have to be done at the next meeting. We're here, it's after 9 o'clock already. Let's go to 9:30.
Let's have consensus also that we are going to plan on having a May 10th meeting.
That's the way it is.
I mean, I prefer that and having gotten all these questions answered than to not. Lori.
Can we stop screen sharing for a second? So
absolutely. I can get
Thank you. That annoys me when I can't see what's going on. So if you want to go till 9:30, Carl, but that's the limit that I'm at, because this group has a really hard time staying on focus. And again, we're over 3 hours and we've gotten through hardly anything.
Yeah, and I would just highly recommend we get succinct. We don't need to repeat, and just like when we do our public input, if you think you're the same boat as somebody else, say ditto or just thumbs up.
Agreed. All right, so
a couple quick thoughts, if I can, Chair. One possibility too is for those of you who have time to review the budget, the upcoming budget presentations. Email us questions and we can try to have and provide answers before the next meeting or get something sent out early. So maybe some of those more basic or generic questions can get answered beforehand. I also think that it's worth noting, if we continue at the same pace, we'll either need to have later meetings on May 3rd and May 10th or an additional meeting, because at this rate, I don't think that even a May 10th meeting we could complete everything as we're going right now.
Okay, so does everybody concur with the 9:30 Carl proposal?
Mhm.
All right, which gives us 18 minutes. Who's next, Tyler?
Let me get back to presenting
Yes,
here.
Tanya. We're on to recreation. It'd probably be great to get through Tanya's budgets instead of cutting it off in the middle. But I think recreation seniors would be a good goal for us.
Okay, let's do that.
Tanya.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Tanya Richardson. I'm the Community Services Director. This department oversees recreation, senior services, the Aquatics Recreation Center Fund, and Parks Capital. Our offices are housed at the Community Center Senior Center, and we have a total of 8.29 FTE for all of those different divisions. I just want to start by saying, given the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to adjust our programs, our services, and our staffing levels. Jordan mentioned this in the opening statement, and our department was affected probably the most. Our department also relies heavily on volunteers, and the ever-evolving situation of the pandemic that also affected us and also added additional challenges. However, I do want to take this opportunity to recognize my staff team, and they had to work really hard. We had to make many sacrifices. We had to be flexible. They have an incredible passion to serve this community. And throughout the pandemic, the ice storms, the fires, we continue to provide essential services, and I'm just proud of what they accomplished and we all accomplished during that time. With that being said, as I move through each division, I can expand a little bit more on our programs and services. So Tyler, I'm gonna do what the chief did. Can you go to the next slide for me?
Yep.
So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments of the Recreation Department. Throughout, the first year of the biennium, we provided continued collaborations with recreation providers to offer more diverse opportunities to expand our programming in music, theater, and science. We increased the resident database to expand outreach and provide timely and marketing communication. We expanded utilization of our social media for marketing and community outreach for our community guide and recreation guide. And then I already mentioned we supported the recreation department, is only made up of 3.33 FTE. And I want to mention that as a recreation manager and then our special events coordinator. The recreation manager is full-time and our special events coordinator is only at 20 hours. The rest of the FTE was made up of umpires and part-time staff who help utilize our help with the recreation programs. So during that time of COVID this past year, recreation department had to shift over to support essential services. So as you look at our budget, you'll notice that our cost recovery, our fees and general fund revenue were significantly down, and they were shifted, over to provide the essential services. The recreation program is comprehensive. It offers special events, and it's designed to enhance the quality of life and boost both our physical and mental health. And right now that is essential in my opinion. And so I know that it is a council goal as we go forward to expand recreation opportunities. So as we go forward, we're looking at continuing to focus our efforts on recovering programming and revenue during this post-COVID-19. We want to look at collaborating with community groups, the school district organizations, and to utilize existing outdoor spaces at the campus for leagues and other different community uses. The offerings we want to also expand is teens, outdoor programming for active outdoor older adults that support inclusion and diversity. We're looking at different things like pickleball that can help, you know, increase productivity for our active older adults. And then assistance in the implementation of Parks Master Plan and Park Development, along with the Recreation Manager. She can assist with that as well. And I also want to expand or talk a little bit about our special events and how our events continue to, you know, increase participation. We have a very limited budget, and so what we have been able to do is tremendous. And again, with Carol Cohen, she's working 20 hours per week, which that has limited our ability to take on more community events. I know it came up about different programs and utilizing the library, and it's been a great collaboration. They've had the staff to help support us so that we can produce these great events for the city. So let's go back to the other one, or not the first one, the third one, Tyler. So in the budget, just looking at the revenue, we already mentioned that you know, due to COVID-19 pandemic, we were not able to do our typical production of different recreation activities. The center has been closed for over a year now. So any kind of programming we have not done. No Mountain Storm basketball or adult softball. We haven't been able to rent the building. We have not been able to do as many special events. So that is reflective. And what we've done to, you know, adjust is we did have reduction of hours. So currently, our recreation manager is working at 32 hours, and our events coordinator moved down to 20 hours for this department. And they are still trying to continue to look at program offerings for the future. This budget reflects that they go back to full-time, and also reflects that Carol Cohen go to full-time status starting in October to help with that cost recovery. We're going to need some time to rebuild these programs and to recover the revenue. We're also looking at the possibility of acquiring an additional vehicle to expand these program offerings. We're looking at leasing options as opposed to purchasing a vehicle. And then I also wanted to just speak on Kathleen Walker's comment about cost recovery. You know, I strongly agree. I feel that if we could do a needs assessment of the community and find out what our recreational needs are, and then we could attach that to a cost recovery analysis, then it would give the recreation programs an idea of what programs the council and the community would like to support, and at what cost recovery that we want for each different program. So I went through that pretty quick, but does anybody have any questions? I'm sure I do.
Rich Sheldon, please.
Yeah, just a quick question. So why, for one, I want to see these programs get opened up as soon as possible, especially things like the softball and all of that. I understand some of the senior programs and the challenges with COVID, but the other stuff, I would like to see that moving like ASAP. So why are we waiting for some of these employees until October to get them back full time when the budget goes into effect in July?
Well, I'm sorry. So the recreation manager comes back full time in July. Carol Cohen, who's the event coordinator, has always been at 25 hours. So she's budgeted to come back to 25 hours starting May 1st. However, we want to make her full time coming into October. So just a clarification on that.
Thank you.
As far as adult softball is concerned, we utilize the fields at the school district. So it's a collaboration with them. So we have been waiting to hear from them when they will be open so that we can use those fields to go ahead and have adult softball.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yep.
Carl.
Real quick, I'm also in favor of getting some of these things started as soon as possible. The city needs to see some community events going, as long as we're safe. Get that all in perspective there. Real quickly, in 2 minutes or less, cost recovery plan. I know, cost recovery plan. What does it entail? How much time do we would expect to put it on the table for something like that? And I'm seeing so many plans at this point, and I guess that's my reaction is one more plan. What can we afford it even? So what would a cost recovery plan look like from your viewpoint? Real quickly.
Well, I don't know an exact cost. I know that a couple years ago, the former city manager had on the docket that we were going to have a training with the council on cost recovery, if you remember that. And we kind of stopped that. So, you know, I would say like starting with that. I've seen many different organizations who have these needs assessments. So I don't know, you know, right off the bat, I don't know what, but we can research it and get an idea. But I think it will help us to get us an idea of what the needs are for the community, because we've always had the philosophy, is my understanding, is to fill the need. So what do we need to fill? We don't necessarily need to do soccer programs at a high level because we have an organization that does that. Same with some of the baseball programs and so forth. So what are the areas that we can do to fill the need for the community?
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that it's important to figure out what we should be providing and what we can afford to provide and stay within those limits. So
and the only other thing I would add to that is just making sure that we are continuing to look at inclusivity as well as diversity and equitability as we go forward with our programming.
Kathleen.
Hi, real quick, I just had a question on your FTEs. I can see, you know, there's Carol and there's Sarah, and Carol's quarter time or half time or something. So where's the other FTE coming? There's, you know, I count that as like, even if we put Carol to, I mean, where's the other FTE?
So part of my salary is allocated in that, as well as I mentioned, so when we have umpires and refs for the programs like the Mountain Storm and the softball.
So those are actually city employees and not just like contracted services or something?
Yes.
And those folks pay for that, right? They cover their costs?
Clarify what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, Mountain Storm, they have fees that, you know, if you want to play, your kid wants to play, you got to pay fees, and those fees cover the cost for the, or not. I mean, maybe they don't, and maybe that's okay. I just was curious.
No, most likely, I mean, I will say one thing about the Mountain Storm and also the adult softball. When you look at our budget, part of the things that we did was break out the basketball and softball and special events. So we could look at that a little clearer and make sure that we were meeting cost recovery. So there is a line item for adult softball. And then when you look down at the bottom, you see the expenses and you can see the percentage of cost recovery between the two. So yes, those umps and refs are paid directly from that revenue of fees and so forth.
Okay, Tanya. I don't see any other questions now, but what I'd like to propose we do is have Tanya do her senior budget. But if there are any questions regarding that, those be passed to Tyler to be answered at the beginning of the next meeting with responses from Tanya so that we come close to our 9:30 if she does the overview of the senior services. How does that sound? Tyler?
That works for me. I'll stop sharing so we can see everyone else. Thumbs up if the committee is on board with that. All right, let me reshare and we'll
sorry, Andy.
Tanya going on her second one.
Thank you for not breaking that up for me. I appreciate that. Okay, so same sort of thing, Tyler. Thank you. So the services division is provides a high quality to many senior citizens as possible. These services include nutrition, such as Meals on Wheels, congregate meals, transportation, such as our shopping shuttle, our daily pickups, as well as elderly and disabled medical transportation. We provide evidence-based exercise programs, our client services, including case management, reassurance, information, and assistance. And this continues to see an increase, especially as you can imagine during the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to see seniors in isolation, and mental health stability was of grave concern. The other thing with our client service coordination is working with family members and caregivers to help navigate a complex system for senior services. So a couple accomplishments I've already mentioned. We provided uninterrupted delivery service of hot meals to homebound individuals throughout the pandemic and continue to do that. We supported that with nutritional food boxes as well from the county. We increased the communication throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, providing assistance, information, case management. That included all of the staff that assisted in answering phone calls. You know, when the fires broke out, we were on the phone calling each of the Meals on Wheels clients to make sure, number one, they were in a safe zone, that they had transportation to where they needed to go, and that they needed, if they needed meals, we could provide it for them. As COVID-19 pandemic continued and we had to navigate through getting the testing done, where they needed to go to get testing done, as well as now the vaccine, and how can we get seniors to getting vaccines and navigate kind of the computer system as well. We did make some improvements to the center, so we included all interior paint. There is a new Sandy style kind of overhang on the west entrance, which is the entrance to the dining room, that provided an additional coverage for the seniors as they leave and come to the center. Also installed a grease trap in the kitchen, you know, to bring us up to code, as well as enclosure to the garbage, around the garbage, what do you call that thing? Whatever it is. In addition, we also, really exciting news is that we received a PG&E grant to promote education in the use of EV vehicles. And I'm happy to announce that our Chevy Bolt electric vehicle arrived today. And so that will be phase 1, and we will be utilizing it for Meals on Wheels, as well as for any other shopping assistance that we can give. But the second phase of that will be to utilize it as a car share program. So seniors will then be able to utilize the vehicle on their own, check it out, and learn more about electric vehicles. So that to me was a huge accomplishment. Our goals going forward is to look at the information that we received over, you know, the pandemic. For instance, we added a lot of virtual programming, and, you know, we realized that there are some barriers for seniors that live in isolation because, one, they're not be able to get internet, or two, they're not able to use the laptops because of education, and three, they also don't have access to the computer software. So how can we use that information to help with our programming going forward? So we'll look at also our volunteers. You know, community services as a whole uses volunteers, but senior services has used volunteers for our Meals on Wheels program as far as drivers, kitchen workers, special events. We utilize them. You know, I know that it's been mentioned about helping in the parks maintenance areas. So coming up with a true strategy on how we can recruit, onboard, and train process volunteers in the future will help keep our costs down for our personnel. And identify various scholarships, grants, and funding opportunities to continue to help fund these programs. And then looking at community-based programs and partners, and how can we collaborate to provide some of our services. For instance, Avamere, we are in communication with, and they have the possibility to provide a respite care program for Alzheimer's, which we passed, but can we work together? They come to our center and then we keep our costs down and be able to provide those services. So those are some of the goals that we're looking at for next year. I forgot to mention that's a 4.96 FTE. So that is a full-time client services coordinator. This is budgeted a senior services manager, which we currently have not had for the last year. But this is budgeted for that person. And then a food services coordinator, which will now be a kitchen worker to help heat the food on a daily basis. And then it also includes drivers who help with the shopping shuttle and transportation services. Tyler, can we go to the next slide? I think I mentioned some of these things already. The Clackamas County grant includes both federal and state reimbursement services provided. Those services that we get reimbursement are some of the ones I've already mentioned: the Meals on Wheels program, evidence-based exercise, things like energy assistance applications, the elderly and disabled transportation. If we provide some recreational trips, we get reimbursement for the transportation of that as well. I mentioned the senior services manager we hired. So we had done a reduction in December, and so we actually laid off 2 people, our driver and our respite care coordinator. In that time, our event coordinator shifted over into the driving position, and this was to help to offset some of the additional costs for our budget and our loss of revenue. So we've been without a driver. Carol Cohen's been driving, as well as myself. We're the only 2 certified drivers. And so we've been taking on those responsibilities and duties. In addition, my staff have been delivering meals. So the very first 6 months of pandemic, it was all staff delivering Meals on Wheels because of a couple different things with the volunteers. 1, safety for themselves and others. And 2, with the pandemic, it was ever involving, so we weren't sure where guidelines were. So we have since started to bring back volunteers and put them through a strict training as well as a background check. But many of the volunteers we had previously have chosen not to come back. And so we had to tap into a new volunteer service base. So those layoffs have now brought us down to basically, Olga is at 32 hours, who is our client service coordinator. Administrative assistant dropped down to 22 hours. She was full-time. And we have a kitchen worker who works 14 hours a week. So with that limited staff, we have accomplished great things. But you know, July 1, we're budgeted to come back to full, which would bring us back to that 4.96. And then continuing to look at COVID guidelines for the senior center. The challenge is right now, the senior center is not allowed to open at any due to working with a vulnerable population. So how can we kind of look at that and possibly provide recreational opportunities or classes, but not be able to bring in the seniors? It's a challenge that we need to look at as we go forward. And with that, does anybody have any questions for me? Or I guess we're waiting on that, right?
I think maybe since we're after the 9:30, I'm sure there are questions for you on this, but if those could be directed to Tyler or directed to you through the city website, and they'll be responded to at the beginning of the next meeting. And I want to say, first off, I appreciate everyone who showed up to the meeting. I think the questions are good, even though they made the meeting go longer than we would have liked. I felt like it was more of a participatory budget meeting than it sometimes was able to be in-person meetings. Because while you might have not, I mean, when I opened up the number of hands up and it's like 6 people wanting to ask questions, I'm thinking, oh God, we're going to go over. But in the long run, I think it's better to have these questions answered after each budget. And if we can all follow Carl's, suggestion to be succinct at the next meeting, and then we can get our questions about Tanya's senior budget to Tyler or to Tanya, so they can be answered at the beginning of the next meeting. And biggest apologies to Andy, who sat through the whole thing and doesn't get to give her presentation. But I do think that we have limited to our, at least for me, I didn't take a nap today. So we need to move on and plan on trying to be a little bit more succinct at the next meeting. But questions are good. And I think it gives us a fuller understanding of what this is. I mean, it's $102 million. I think the last time when I was involved, it was to show you how inflation works. It's been 12 years. I think it was more around $80 to $81 million back then. Definitely wasn't 102 million. So we've gone up over the last 12 years, and there are some important things to deal with, especially with COVID. All you department heads are dealing with challenges, and this budget process is probably just another one of those challenges for you. But I do appreciate your time and your willingness to answer questions from the committee. Dawn.
Hey, do you think we'll get to public input next week, or will it be the following week?
Well, I don't see anybody. I would have asked if there was, I looked at our participants both off and on, and there was nobody in there from the public. It's either committee members or department heads. There's no public.
I had some that had to put kids to bed. So I'm just wondering for next week, will they be able to testify or not?
Why don't we set up the next Monday when we do it? Why don't we set a cutoff time for department and presentations to leave at least 20 minutes at the end for comments? But I've been constantly looking at the participants and have not seen any community members signed on as non-video, or unless I'm wrong, Jeff, but I have not seen.
Chair?
Yes.
May I suggest we start our next meeting with public comment?
That would be a good idea. We didn't have any public at the beginning of this, but it'd be good. We'll start with public comment based on from this meeting that they watched and wanted to comment on, and any anticipated comments.
And staff, if staff wouldn't mind maybe advertising that to the public on our social media this week, that'd be great.
We can sandwich the next meeting, time permitting, with public comment at the beginning and public comment at the end. Limit it maybe to 10 or 15 minutes, but try and get all the stuff that's on that we didn't get to tonight, and the start of the urban renewal at the next meeting. But anything else, Tyler or Jordan? And
thank you very much.
Thank you all for your patience and your questions. And I again apologize, Andy. Anyway, we'll see you next Monday. Good night.